Chapter 121. I know how to recite, father. Xiao Ju looked at her in disbelief. What did you just call me? Yin stared at him with clear eyes and said seriously, the way of the university is to be virtuous, to be close to the people, and to stop at being virtuous. Knowing when to stop leads to steadfastness. Being calm leads to tranquility. Being calm leads to thoughtfulness. Being straightforward leads to virtue. There is a root and an end to everything, and there is a beginning and end to everything. Knowledge is to investigate things. One is to cultivate one's body. The thickest is the thinnest, and the thinnest is the last. Lin Shuanghe was stunned at first, but then he gradually reacted. He pointed at Yin and asked Xiao Ju, "Is my little sister he drunk?" Yin suddenly rushed over and threw herself into Xiao Ju's arms. She hugged his waist and almost pushed Xiao Ju back 2 steps. She buried her face in his chest and rubbed it. She stammered, "Father, I know how to recite. I've improved." There was a dead silence in the room. It was hard to describe Xiao Ju's ugly expression with just a few words. Lin Shuanghe covered his face and his shoulders shook. He couldn't stop laughing. Huaijin, I've seen people treat you like a husband, but this is the first time I've seen someone treat you like a father. How does it feel to be a father? This little girl is too obedient. She's very good at reciting books. She's very talented." As if encouraged by Lin Shuanghe's words, Yin raised her head from Xiao Ju's chest and stared at Xiao Ju with sparkling eyes. "Father, I'm now the first in the Liangzhou guards." Xiao Ju grabbed her arm and tried to pull her hand away from his waist. "Let go." "No." Yin was very strong. Xiao Ju didn't know if it was because she threw rocks every day, but he couldn't pull her hand away. Yin raised his head and looked at him. "You can test me. I can answer anything." She looked like a child who got first place and wagged her tail to show off. Xiao Ju facepalmed. "Let go first." "No." She hugged Xiao Ju's waist even tighter and wanted to stick her whole body to him. Xiao Ju desperately moved back, trying to distance himself from her and not let his body touch hers. Unfortunately, it was futile. Xiao Ju wanted to pull Yin's hand away. Lin Shuanghe said, "Sister Yin is still injured. If you move her, you'll hurt to do it. Another half a year has passed, and it's not good." Xiao Ju's to Xiao Ju's to Xiao Ju. "Just let her hug you for a while. To be. She was a little girl who had come all the way to Liangzhou and hadn't been home for so long. She must be missing her father. He made a hugging gesture. "Can't you give her the warmth of home? Don't be so petty. You're not the one who's at a disadvantage." Xiao Ju was about to speak, but the person in her arms had already buried her head in her chest. She continued to recite in a muffled voice. "You are a general. You are both tough and soft. You are also a general. Mortals judge generals by their bravery. Bravery is one of the few things that make up a general. A brave man must be flexible. If he is flexible and does not know the benefits, it is impossible. Therefore, there are 5 things to be cautious about. The first is reason, the second is preparation, the third is fruit, the fourth is war, and the 5th is agreement. Reason is to govern the masses as if they are widows. Preparation is to go out as if they are facing the enemy. Fruit is to face the enemy without thinking. Although the war is to defeat the enemy, the war is to start, receiving an order and not rejecting it. Returning after defeating the enemy is the etiquette of a general. The day my teacher came out, there was glory in death, no disgrace in life." Lin Shuanghe listened in a daze. He knew the previous one, but he didn't know this one. He asked Xiao Ju, "What is my Mimi reciting?" "Wu Zi's Art of War Treatise on Generals." Xiao Ju was slightly surprised. She actually knew this? "My Mimi is really knowledgeable." Lin Shuanghe praised. "You can even recite this." "Of course." Yin poked her head out from Xiao Ju's arms. "As a general, this is how it should be. Mimi is really ambitious." Lin Shuanghe smiled and said, "You want to be a general?" "I was originally a female general." Good. Lin Shuanghe smiled and covered his face with his fan. "Look at your ability." Yin raised her head again and looked up at Xiao Ju. She happily asked, "Father, Did I recite it well? Father again. Xiao Ju's feelings at this moment were indescribable. Outside the door, Shenhan had just walked in when he saw two people hugging through the open window. When he looked again, it was actually Xiao Ju hugging He Yin. He Yin hugged Xiao Ju's waist and said something softly. Shenhan was stunned, and his face turned red. He only felt that it was unbelievable. Damn it. Although he already knew that the relationship between these two was not ordinary, seeing such an intimate scene with his own eyes was still shocking. Shenhan pondered the meaning of Xiao Ju's words. Could it be that she still had feelings for He Yin? Perhaps they had already renewed their previous relationship and reunited? There was still Lin Xuanhe in the room. She just stood there and watched. Didn't she feel that she was the extra one? Xiao Ju was being intimate with He Yin. Didn't she feel awkward being watched by Lin Xuanhe? The big shots from Shuajing were really hard to understand. In an instant, Shenhan felt tired. He turned around and tiptoed away. Forget it. I'll just pretend that I didn't see anything. In the room, Lin Xuanhe was about to die of laughter. Xiao Ju's face was ashen. She tried several times to pull He Yin down, but failed. He Yin hugged his waist tightly, as if he was hugging a family heirloom. Father, I've improved. I'm number one now. Why aren't you saying anything? She was a little sad. Can you praise me? Xiao Ju said, I'm not your father. It would have been better if he didn't say this. As soon as he said this, He Yan's eyes suddenly filled with tears. She looked at him tearfully, as if he had done something evil. She asked, You don't recognize me either? Xiao Ju paused. Suddenly, an inexplicable sense of irritation appeared in his heart. He was most afraid of women's tears. Especially in this situation, it seemed as if he was the one who made He Yin cry. Sure enough, the divine hand in white, who was most protective of girls, immediately stood up for his newly recognized sister. He said, It's just a matter of one sentence. Look at how you made the little girl cry. She's such a sensible and smart child. If you don't recognize her, others will rush to recognize her. Xiao Huijin, quickly praise her. Immediately, right now, Xiao Ju was speechless. He suppressed his anger and lowered his head to look at her. She was still dressed like a teenager, but her frowning and pitiful appearance was really a little girl. Perhaps she had mistaken him for He Sui. Oh, but was He Sui usually very strict with her? Even when he was drunk, he had to gain his father's approval. In an instant, Xiao Ju saw his own shadow in this girl. He was discouraged and resigned to his fate. He gave up trying to pull her hand and said, You did very well. Really? He Yin immediately looked at him with sparkling eyes. Really? Xiao Ju spoke against his conscience. Thank you. She was a little embarrassed. I'll do better next time. I'll make father even more proud. Xiao Ju had a splitting headache. He only said, Then let go of me first. You're hugging me too tightly. But I really like hugging father. He Yin revealed a very satisfied smile. She greedily hugged him and did not want to let go. I wanted to hug father like this for a long time. Why can my brothers and sisters do it, but I can't? Lin Xuanhe was still smiling. When he heard this, his heart ached so much that tears almost fell. He only said, Is sister being bullied at home? Her father doesn't even hug her? Xiao Ju was also very puzzled. In the secret letter from Shuajing, He Sui only had one son and one daughter. He Yin only had one brother. How could he have a sister? I'm number one now. He Yin stared at Xiao Ju and said, Father, aren't you happy? Xiao Ju. He said expressionlessly, I'm very happy. Then what do I get as a reward? Reward? Xiao Ju frowned. What reward do you want? He Yin rubbed her face against the buttons in front of his lapel. Her face was very hot, and it was very cool. However, Xiao Ju's body stiffened. You don't touch me. As soon as he said this, he saw He Yin let go of his lapel. She felt something from his waist and proudly showed it to Xiao Ju. I want this. That won't do. Xiao Ju reached out to snatch it, but He Yin dodged. This person was drunk and her mind was not clear. However, she was still agile and her footsteps were not messy. Just by looking at her appearance, one could not tell that she was drunk. He Yin lowered her head and looked at the thing in her hand. It was a jade pendant carved with a snake. It was a rare black jade. It was warm and cold to the touch. One look, and she knew it was a treasure. She loved it so much that she could not put it down. "Thank you, father." Xiaoju was so angry that he laughed. "I didn't say I'm giving it to you." Lin Shuanga stopped him from snatching the jade. He said, "Why are you arguing with a drunk person? Let her play with it now. Tomorrow when you're sober, you can ask her for medicine. How can she not give it to you?" However, he touched his chin. "Sister, he has good taste. She saw the most valuable thing on you at first glance. Not bad." Xiaoju was too lazy to pay attention to him. However, she did not try to snatch the jade from He Yin. "Watch me." Lin Shuanga walked in front of He Yin and coughed lightly. "Brother He, let me ask you, do you like this jade?" He Yin played with the jade pendant in his hand. "I like it. Do you like Chu Xilan?" "Chu Xilan?" He Yin asked in confusion. "Who is that?" "You're drunk and don't remember this person. It seems like you're not with Chu Zhao." Lin Shuanga smiled. "Then do you like Xiaoju?" "Xiaoju, are you done?" He Yan's answer was unexpected. She looked up as if she was thinking about the name. After a while, she nodded. "I like it." Lin Shuanga's eyes lit up. "What do you like about him?" "Medicine for me." He Yan held his head. "I'm so sleepy." After he finished speaking, he fell on the soft couch and fell asleep. Lin Shuanga stood up straight. She said, "Waste." Xiaoju did not hear what He Yin said. She was a bit annoyed. "What? She likes your waist." Lin Shuanga opened his fan. "She's too direct." Xiaoju threw a teacup at him. "Get lost." On the other side, Xiang put away the empty wine pot in the room. The smell of spring in Chang and still lingered in the courtyard. Chu Zhao took off his outer garment and sat down on the couch, wearing only his inner garment. The beds in the Liang province guards were not as hard as the beds in the capital. Although they were not as hard as the beds, they were not comfortable. Xiang walked over and knelt in front of the couch. "Young master, this servant did not do a good job and was not able to win over He Yin." The youth called He Yin was very young. Just now, he drank a pot of wine and looked drunk. However, he wanted to discuss the art of war with Chu Zhao. Chu Zhao did not understand the art of war, so he listened to the youth speak with assurance. In the end, he probably got tired and left alone. Xiang was very confident in her appearance. Although she did not dare to say that everyone would fall for her beauty, such as Xiao Huijin and Chu Xilan, she was more than enough to deal with a new recruit of the Liang province guards, who knew that tonight, no matter how gentle and flirtatious she appeared, He Yan's gaze was only filled with admiration and no evil thoughts. Men had different tastes for women, and it could be seen at a glance. Although He Yin was shocked by her beauty, he did not have any other thoughts. This made Xiang feel defeated. When her master, Chu Zhao, heard this, he was stunned for a moment. Then, he shook his head and smiled. "It's not your fault." Xiang raised her head. "Fourth young master." Chu Zhao looked at the incense burning on the table in the room. This was the calming incense he had brought from the capital. He was always a light sleeper, so he always brought it with him wherever he went. His eyes flashed back to when he caught a glimpse of the woman's lively eyes under the white veil at the horse track in the capital. Who would have thought that there would be a woman among the new recruits of the Liang province guards? He slowly smiled. When He Yin woke up, he was in his own room. He was sleeping soundly with half of his legs dangling off the bed. He did not even cover himself with a blanket. Outside the room, the sun was just right. A ray of light shone in through the window. It was so bright that it hurt his eyes. For a moment, he could not tell whether it was day or night. He Yin sat up and shook his head. He did not feel the pain of a hangover. On the contrary, he felt refreshed. She thought to herself that Chang and Spring was indeed much better than the inferior yellow wine of the Liang province guards. Although the alcohol was strong, it did not go to the head. There was a reason why it was expensive. Last night, she had been dragged away by Chu Zhao and his servant girl. She had gone to Chu Zhao's room to drink 2 cups of wine. She seemed to have drunk a bit too much. The alcohol had gotten to her head and made her very sleepy. She did not know when she had returned to her room and fell asleep. However, judging from the current situation, she should not have caused any trouble like last time. He had planned to get out of bed and pour himself a cup of tea. After a night's sleep, he was very thirsty. As soon as he moved, he felt something in his hand. When he looked down, he found that his right hand was tightly clutching something that looked like a jade pendant. What kind of toy was this? When did it get into her hand? Hien was stunned for a moment. He opened his palm and carefully examined it. The black jade pendant in his palm was not big, but it was very delicately carved. The snake pattern was complicated and gorgeous. As she moved, it emitted a gentle light. It did not look like an ordinary jade pendant. Did she get drunk and rob someone last night? Hien and the jade pendant stared at each other for a moment. They were still at a loss. Forget it. You might as well go out and ask someone else. Hien thought for a moment. He first put the jade pendant on the table. Then he got up and washed up. When he was done, he grabbed the jade pendant and went out. He also wanted to ask Song Tao Dao if there were any leftover steamed buns. He had woken up too late in the morning and did not even make it in time for breakfast. As soon as he went out, he met Shin Mushue, who lived not far from here. Shin Mushue was carrying a medicine tray to the medical hall. When he saw Hien, he stopped and greeted Hien. Miss Shun. Hien asked, "Is eldest Miss Song here? I have something to discuss with her." Shin Mushue said, "She is not in the room. She went to the martial arts arena. Why are you looking for her? If it is important, I will help you pass on the message when she comes back later." Hien scratched his head. "It is not a big deal. Since she is not here, forget it." He turned around and was about to leave. When he moved, the jade pendant in his hand was revealed. Shin Mushue was stunned. He hesitated and said, "This jade, She seemed to know who the owner of this jade pendant was. Miss Shin has seen this jade pendant before." Hien smiled calmly. Shin Mushue still looked surprised. "Why do you have the governor's jade pendant?" Xiao Ju's jade pendant. Why is it with her?" Hien also wanted to ask this question. She also did not know. What did she do when she was drunk last night? Did she fight with Xiao Ju again and snatch his jade pendant? Looking at Shun Mushue's suspicious eyes, Hien coughed twice. "This is indeed the governor's jade pendant. When we were talking yesterday, Governor felt that it was inconvenient to wear it, so he asked me to keep it for him for the time being. I was about to give it back to him. But, Miss Shun, brother Lin Shuang's voice came from behind. He must have heard the conversation between Hien and Shin Mushue. He smiled and waved his fan. "Miss Shun, are you going to the medical center?" Shin Mushue nodded slightly. "Then go quickly. The medicine will be cold if you are late." He then said to Hien, "Brother you have not eaten yet, right? I still have some pastries. Just eat some to fill your stomach." Hien said, "Thank you, young Master Lin." Shin Mushue bid farewell to the two of them. Hien followed Lin Shuang to his room. She hesitated and wanted to ask questions, but she did not know where to start. Lin Shuang put a few plates of salty pastries on the table and poured a cup of hot tea for her. Seeing her hesitant appearance, he smiled and said, "Are you still thinking about the jade pendants?" Hien was surprised. "You know, last night, when Sister He got drunk and entered the room in Huaijin, I was there from beginning to end." Lin Shuang has supported his chin with the handle of his fan. "Sister He really opened my eyes." Hien felt more and more uneasy after hearing his words. But thinking carefully, she always had a sense of propriety. It was impossible for her to make a scene and lose her composure after getting drunk. At most, she would spar with Xiao Ju. But how could Xiao Ju be so weak? Not only was she beaten up, but she also had the jade pendant stolen from her. "Last night, I didn't do anything out of line, right?" she asked tentatively. It would have been better if she did not ask. As soon as she said this, Lin Shuanghe seemed to have thought of an interesting scene. He first tried to hold back his laughter, then couldn't hold it in anymore. He slapped the table and laughed wildly. Hien looked at this refined young man who was laughing uncontrollably. He did not care about his image at all. He did not look like the elegant young master from Shua capital. Hien was so anxious that her heart was scratching. She waited for Lin Shuanghe to finish laughing before asking, "Dr. Lin, what did I do to make you laugh so hard?" Nothing. Lin Shuanghe waved his hand and smiled. "Actually, it was nothing big. I just wanted to let Xiao Huaijin experience what it feels like to be a father at such a young age." Hien dropped the scallion pastry in her hand onto the table. "Did I call him father?" Lin Shuanghe asked curiously. "You actually still remember?" Hien covered her face. She really did not remember. But she remembered that when she was young, there was also a family banquet. At that time, she had gone from the last place to the third place from the bottom, hoping to be praised by her father. In the end, no one cared. During the family banquet, she accidentally drank a mouthful of plum wine, as Osmanthus do. At that time, Hien had not yet joined the army. She did not have the tolerance to drink 1,000 cups and was drunk after 1 cup. After she was drunk, she hugged He Yuanliang's leg and called him father. She even asked He Yuanliang for a reward. When she woke up the next day, the He family said that it was because He Yuanxing was too strict with Hien. That was why she thought that second uncle was acting coquettishly. Madame He, however, did not like it and scolded her in the room so that she would not say anything wrong in the future. But in the end, it became a hurdle in her heart that she could not get over. Because she had never been acknowledged, she especially looked forward to it. Because she saw other sisters acting coquettishly with their fathers. She longed for her father to pat her on the head and say, "You did well." Perhaps it was because she saw Lin Shuanghe in the Liangzhou Guards, which reminded her of the things that happened when she was young. What she thought about during the day, she dreamed about it at night. Even when she was drunk, she could not avoid it. Instead, she became a joke. Forget it. What was done was done. So what if she could turn back time? Hien put the jade in her hand on the table. What is this? This is Huijin's reward for you. Lin Shuanghe held back his laughter. Reward? You memorized very well. You memorized the way of university and Wu Zi's art of war in front of Huijin. Huijin was very pleased and gave you this jade as a reward. Hien, I snatched it, didn't I? Lin Shuanghe failed to hold back his laughter and laughed loudly. As he laughed, he slapped his fan. Sister He, you didn't see Huijin's face at that time. I've known him for so long, but it's the first time I've seen him so embarrassed. Which woman in this world would dare to hug him and not let go? He was forced to retreat step by step. He even gave away his family heirloom jade and had nothing to say. Only you, sister. He cupped his fist at Hien. Only you. Hien was dizzy from his words. She caught the key words in his words. Family heirloom? She looked at the jade on the table. This one? The night before Madame Zhao's zodiac, she dreamed of a big black snake with 2 pieces of jade in its mouth. It was circling around the pillar in front of their residence. Later, after Xiao Jing was born, she took the name Ruby. There was a banded gentleman like gold or tin, like a jade. After Xiao Ju was born, her family name was Huijin. Hien said, Huijin held Yushi, so he couldn't show his poverty. Yes, that's what it means. Lin Shuanghe put away his fan. The 2 brothers' names are both related to jade. Because Madame Xiao dreamed of the big black snake, the Empress Dowager bestowed a 2-colored jade, half black and half white. It was made into 2 jade pendants with snake patterns. The white one was given to Xiao Ruby, and the black one was given to Xiao Huijin. Ever since I've known Xiao Huijin, I've never seen this jade pendant leave his body. Hien looked at the jade pendant in front of her and suddenly felt that it weighed more than 1,000 pounds of gold. That's why I said, Sister He, you have a very good eye. Lin Shuanghe praised. Of Xiao Huijin's entire body, apart from himself, this jade pendant is the most valuable thing. You didn't miss out on either of them and took them all. Brilliant, amazing, beautiful. Chapter 122. On the way to the practice field, Hien was still thinking about what Lin Shuanghe had said. The snake-patterned black jade in her hand was as cold as water. In the winter, it was so cold that it cleared her mind. Yesterday, he had gotten drunk and stolen Xiao Ju's jade. To be able to do such a shocking thing, it seemed that in the future, she really couldn't drink as she pleased. As Hien thought, she had already reached the side of the practice field. In front of Xiao Ju stood a person wearing the black armor of the Southern Fu Army. His head was lowered and he didn't speak. When he got closer, Xiao Ju said coldly, "This is your formation?" That person was probably his vice commander, the leader in charge of the Southern Fu Army's formation. He looked tall and strong, but in front of Xiao Ju, he was like a child who had made a mistake. He lowered his head and said, "This subordinate knows his mistake. Everyone might not be used to the snowy weather in Liangzhou. Not used to it?" Second young master Xiao glanced at him and asked, Do you need me to teach you how to get used to it? He Yin clearly saw that the tall and sturdy man was so frightened by Xiao Ju's words that he trembled. He said, "This subordinate will take them to train right now. Double the daily training," Xiao Ju said calmly. "If this happens again, you don't have to stay in the Liangzhou Guard anymore." Yes. The man obediently left again. He Yin craned his neck to look at the martial arts field. He saw that after the man left, he poured a torrent of abuse on the southern prefecture soldiers standing in front of him, and once again began to drill the military formation. He couldn't help but be speechless. Xiao Ju's attitude towards the southern prefecture soldiers was different from his attitude towards the Liang Province Guard recruits. He rarely showed his face towards the Liang Province Guard recruits, while he was more distant towards Shunhan and the others, and was even more courteous. Only when he faced the Southern Fu army did he truly show his usual self. Casual, cold, like a military governor who would scold people at the slightest disagreement. When she was General Fei Hong, was she also this annoying? He Yin silently reflected on himself. Just as she was thinking, Xiao Ju turned around. When she saw her, she paused for a moment before asking impatiently, "What are you doing here again?" He Yin smiled apologetically and stretched out her palm. There was a piece of black jade lying in her palm. She said, "Governor, you seem to have left something with me last night. I'm specially returning it to you." Return? Xiao Ju chewed on the word "her" playfully. She bent over and stared into her eyes. Her lips twitched as she said indifferently, "My dear daughter is so considerate." He Yin, why was this person so vengeful? Besides, even if she called him daddy, it was Xiao Ju who took advantage of her. Why did Xiao Ju make it sound like she had done something unforgivable? He Yin tried his best to maintain his composure and only said, "Governor, you really know how to joke. This piece of black jade looks very precious. Governor, please don't lose it in the future. You should take good care of it." She picked up the jade and reached out to touch Xiao Ju's waist. Xiao Ju took a step back and looked alarmed. "What are you doing?" "I'm putting it on for you." He Yin had an innocent look on her face. "Isn't this jade supposed to be tied around the waist?" Xiao Ju suddenly remembered what Lin Shuanghe had said yesterday. "She likes your waist." He Yin wanted to step forward, but Xiao Ju raised his hand to stop her. He looked at her with a complicated expression. "I'll do it myself." "Oh." He Yin did not understand and handed the jade to him. She watched as Xiao Ju put the jade back on. The black jade fell on his dark blue robe and looked very beautiful. She looked at it seriously. Little did she know that Xiao Ju saw her like this and narrowed his eyes. He immediately turned around and pulled down his robe. Was he stung by an insect? He Yin was puzzled. Inside the martial arts arena, the soldiers' loud orders could be heard. He Yin followed him to the edge of the balcony and looked down. The South House soldiers were already very organized, and their morale was also outstanding. This kind of strong soldier, he almost scolded them to tears just now. What was wrong with Xiao Ju? Wasn't he too picky? If he took over the Fuyue army, he would not have enough time to scold them. He would not even have enough time to eat. He Yin looked and said what was on his mind. She said, "They're training well. You were too fierce just now." "Fierce?" "Yes," He Yin said. "If it was me, I would have been scared to death." Xiao Ju laughed again. Her smile was a little mocking. "I don't think you think I'm fierce. That's because I'm used to being scolded." He Yin looked down at the Nanfu army. "Arrow formation." Xiao Ju said, "How is it?" "They're already very well trained. It's just that the snow has been slippery recently. The soldiers on the left of the last row can't keep up. Other than the arrow formation, what other formations do you know?" Xiao Ju asked casually. There are a lot." He Yin counted with her fingers: star scattering formation, mandarin ducks formation, fish lowly formation, crane wing formation. She listed more than 10 formations in a row. Seeing that Xiao Ju's gaze was focused on her body, she unconsciously stopped and asked, Why are you looking at me?" Xiao Ju turned around and placed her hands on the railing of the balcony. She smiled lazily and said, "I'm looking at how good you are, female general." He Yin, she decided to be thick-skinned and said, "I'm so good. Won't you consider promoting me to be your right-hand man? Our swords together will definitely be able to cut through the universe." Xiao Ju sneered. Who's talking to you about power? Don't keep people at arm's length all the time. You should learn to be approachable like me. Xiao Ju ignored her. Tian was about to say something when a voice called out from behind him. Young master. It was Fei Nu, young master. Fei Nu looked at Yin. There's movement in Lei Ho. Xiao Ju nodded. I know. He turned around and walked downstairs. He was probably going to the dungeon. Yin wanted to follow him, but stopped after taking a step. Forget it. If something really happened, Xiao Ju would know even if he didn't say anything. If he followed him now, he wouldn't be an eyesore to Xiao Ju. It would be better to find Chu Zhao and ask him if she did anything inappropriate to Chu Zhao when she was drunk yesterday. If she did, she would have to line up and apologize. Thinking of this, she waved at Xiao Ju. I still have something to do. I want to accompany you. See you later. The corner of Slave Fei's mouth twitched. Look at how familiar she was. Did someone invite her? Xiao Ju was already used to He Yan's shameless behavior. She walked down the stairs and said, Let's go. When He Yan went to Chu Zhao's room, Chu Zhao was practicing calligraphy. Yesterday, she came in a hurry and it was late at night. She only drank in the courtyard and didn't notice Chu Zhao's room. She only felt that it wasn't luxurious enough. Today, she saw it and realized that it wasn't luxurious enough. It was simple and crude. Other than a table and a bed, there were only 2 chairs in the room. There were no decorations at all. However, this fourth young master Chu was quite happy with himself. He even put incense in the room and hung a gauze curtain. Therefore, the originally simple room looked like a hermit's room. Ing Xiang saw her and smiled. Young master He, are you here to see our young master? Oh, He Yin said, I came to give fourth young master Chu some snacks. She raised the box. Inside the box was the unfinished scallion oil pastry that Lin Shuanghe gave her in the morning. He Yin originally wanted to leave some for when she was hungry. However, it wouldn't be good to come empty-handed when she came to see Chu Zhao. Thus, she reluctantly considered it a greeting gift. Fourth young master is practicing calligraphy, Ing Xiang said with a smile. Young master He, please follow this servant. He Yin followed her inside and saw Chu Zhao sitting at the table and writing. She stood behind Chu Zhao and couldn't help but read aloud. There is not a speck of dust on the green mountain, not a cloud in the blue sky. There is only one moon in the sky, only one person in the mountain. At this time I hear the sound of the pine. At this time I hear the sound of the bell. At this time I hear the sound of the stream. At this time I hear the sound of insects. As soon as she finished speaking, Chu Zhao finished writing the last stroke. He turned his head and saw her. He smiled and said, Brother He, you're here? He Yin walked around the words he had written and praised. Young Master Chu's handwriting is really good. Chu Zhao's handwriting was different from Xiao Ju's. Xiao Ju's handwriting was sharp and forceful. It carried a kind of cold and unbridled feeling. Chu Zhao's handwriting, on the other hand, was beautiful and gentle, just like the feeling he gave people. His poems were also simple and elegant. It was really hard to imagine that he would be related to Su Jingfu. However, when she thought about Su Jingfu, if He Yin wasn't close to Xiao Ju now, and if she hadn't heard Ding Yi's words before, in her heart, Su Jingfu would just be an honest and upright old prime minister. Brother He, why did you come to see me? Chu Zhao stood up and put away the pen and paper. He brought He Yin to the only table in the room and sat down. The 2 chairs were just right. He said to Ing Xiang, pour some tea for young Master He. Ing Xiang smiled and went to get the tea. He Yin said, I didn't come to see you for anything. It's just that I drank fourth young Master Chu's Chong and Chun last night. I felt bad, so I sent you some snacks. She motioned for Chu Zhao to look at the box of snacks on the table, but she was too embarrassed to open it. After all, it looked too simple. Thank you. Chu Zhao was very considerate. I just wanted to try the snacks of the Liang Province Guard and see how they are different from the ones in Shua. Brother He sent them just in time. Ian coughed twice. I almost forgot to ask fourth young master. Last night, I drank 2 cups too much. I didn't cause any trouble for fourth young master, right? She scratched her head. I like to talk nonsense when I'm drunk. If I said something wrong, fourth young master, please don't take it to heart. Chu Zhao looked at her and smiled. Brother He, you didn't come to my place today, just to ask me this, right? Look, as expected of the current Prime Minister's favorite student. He was so meticulous that she had nothing to say. As if he could see He Yan's awkwardness and embarrassment, Chu Zhao smiled and said, "Don't worry. Brother, he didn't do anything last night. All you did was talk to me about the art of war. It's just that I don't know much about the art of war, so I couldn't ask Brother He for advice. I wasted Brother He's effort." He looked at He Yin and sighed. "I'm just surprised that Brother He knows so much. He Yin." She silently reflected on herself. In the future, she would never call other people peacocks again. Looking at her drunk appearance, she was the peacock, okay? It was too embarrassing to go around showing off how much she knew when she was drunk. "Fourth young master, you flatter me." He uncovered her face with her hands. "If I say more, I'll really be too ashamed to show my face." Ying Xiang came over with 2 cups of tea. She placed 1 cup in front of He Yin and smiled. "Young master, you try it." He Yin picked it up and took a sip. She couldn't help but sigh. "It's so sweet. Shuo Jing's tea isn't as bitter as Liangzhou's." Ying Xiang placed the other cup in front of Chu Zhao. "It's fine as long as young master he likes it." He Yin looked at the tea in front of her and suddenly thought of another matter. She looked at Chu Zhao and pretended to casually ask, "Fourth young master Chu, have you been living in Shuo Jing for a long time?" "Yes." "Then you should know a lot about Shuo Jing's news." He Yin looked at the tea leaves floating in the cup and said, "I've been in Liangzhou for half a year. Here, I've been training hard every day. It's very boring. Ever since I got injured, I didn't even go for daily training. I've been staying in my room all day. I've almost become moldy. It's not easy for a friend from Shuo Jing to visit." She moved closer and looked at Chu Zhao with a burning gaze. "Fourth young master, can you tell me about the interesting things that have happened in Shuo Jing in the past half a year?" "Interesting things?" Chu Zhao was stunned. He Yin nodded. "That's right, it's something fun. That's a lot," Chu Zhao said warmly. "Brother He, what kind of things do you want to hear?" "What kind of things?" He Yin thought for a moment. "I don't think there's anything particularly interesting about ordinary people. Let's talk about Shuo Jing's official family. For example, the old master was caught red-handed with his wife. Which family's son wasn't their biological son, but was actually adopted? Even though Chu Zhao always had a good temper, he was still choked by He Yan's words. He slowly opened his mouth. "I don't know much about these private matters. I'll pick some that I know and tell Brother He." He Yin hurriedly nodded. Then she listened to this 4th young master of Count Shijin's Fu talk about all the officials in Shuo Jing. However, she didn't hear any of the so-called interesting things. It was nothing more than someone who had been promoted or someone whose salary had increased by 2 sure. Someone whose memorial was too ugly and was disliked by the emperor. Someone's wife received a rare piece of cloth and gave it to an imperial concubine to please her. 4th young Master Chu was handsome, had a good temperament, and was patient. He wasn't like Xiao Ju, who got impatient quickly. However, He Yin almost lost her patience when talking to him. She endured and endured. After drinking 2 cups of tea, she still hadn't heard what she wanted to hear. She couldn't help but interrupt Chu Zhao. "4th young Master Chu, when you were in Shuo Jing, did you know the current General Fei Hong?" As soon as she said this, Chu Zhao paused. He picked up his tea and took a sip. He asked with a smile, "Why are you suddenly talking about him?" "Every day when I was in the Liang Province Guard, the instructors were always privately discussing who was more powerful, General Feng Yun or General Fei Hong. I see General Feng Yun every day now, so there's nothing strange about her. However, I've never seen General Fei Hong." She smiled. "You also know that General Fei Hong and I both have the same surname. Perhaps we were from the same family in our previous lives. I just want to hear what's strange about him. Is he really that powerful?" Chu Zhao looked at He Yin. After a while, he shook his head and said with a smile, "General, he and I are only officials of the same court. We're not familiar with each other. I've only seen him a few times. He's a good person and very powerful. Back then, he quelled the chaos in Xichang. He was very brave. What about now? Has he been promoted in the capital? He was originally a 3rd-rank military general. If he was promoted too quickly, people would talk behind his back." Chu Zhao said, "However, His Majesty appreciates him very much. Every few days, he would summon him into the palace and have him teach His Highness the Crown Prince swordsmanship. It seems that in the future, he won't be worse than Military Governor Xiao. He Rufei had already reached this level? He Yan's smile froze. Chu Zhao asked, "What's wrong?" He Yan picked up her cup and took a sip to cover it up. She said, "I'm just sighing. We both have the same surname, and he's only a few years older than me. However, his achievements are something that I can't achieve in my lifetime." "Brother He, there's no need to belittle yourself." Chu Zhao comforted her with a smile. General Fei Hong also risked his life on the battlefield to achieve his achievements. Moreover, you're still young. In the future, you might not be worse than him. Her words didn't comfort He Yin. She raised her head again, and that heartless smile appeared on her face again. "Is that all? What about the rest?" General Fei Hong should be engaged at his age. Could it be that he doesn't have a girl he likes? If that's the case, wouldn't it be too tragic? Do Wei's two famous generals, Feng Yun and Fei Hong, are they going to be single for the rest of their lives? Chu Zhao paused for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "I don't know about that. However, up until now, there hasn't been any news of General Fei Hong getting engaged." Ian nodded. "Why?" Chu Zhao smiled and looked at her. "Brother He, you have a sister at home. Do you want to—" No. Ian hurriedly waved her hands. "I only have one younger brother. I've never thought about this. This is General Fei Hong. How can ordinary people like us be related to him? I don't dare to think about it." Chu Zhao nodded thoughtfully. In the dungeon, Xiao Ju sat on a chair and looked at the person in the cell. More than 10 days had passed. Lei Ho's entire body was shockingly thin. It was as if he was a completely different person from 10 days ago. He also did not sleep well. His entire body seemed to be tormented by nightmares. His eye sockets were deeply sunken. The originally tall man had become much more stooped. Fei Nu delivered the letter and said in a low voice, "We found the person who met Lei Ho." The letter came from Jiang. Jiang? Xiao Ju raised her eyebrows. "That's right. Xiao Huaijin." Lei Ho opened his mouth. His voice seemed to have been burned by fire. It was extremely hoarse. It was as if he would not be able to speak in the next moment. His lips were cracked and bloodshot. He said, "I've already written a letter to the person who met me, as you said. According to the agreement, you can let my wife and son go." Xiao Ju glanced at him and smiled. "In your eyes, am I such a person who keeps her promises?" "You." Lei Ho's expression changed greatly. He suddenly stood up. However, his hands and feet were shackled. As soon as he moved, there was a rustling sound. These days, he had eaten very little. His entire body was weak. When he moved, he did not reach Xiao Ju. Instead, he fell to the ground. The young man sat on a chair and looked down at him with his head tilted. It was as if he was admiring his sorry state. After a while, he slowly said, "I only said that I would consider it." As a prisoner, he had to have the self-awareness of a prisoner. Lei Ho finally realized that from the moment he stepped into the Liangzhou guards, he was destined to be a prisoner. He was no match for this man. When he was 16 years old, he could drown 60,000 people in Guis City. He could also kill Zhao Nuo without batting an eyelid. His ruthlessness and methods were unparalleled. "I beg you." He slowly knelt down and kowtowed to Xiao Ju. "Let my wife and son go." The man looked at him for a moment. Then he slowly said, "Okay, let me ask you again. Do you only communicate with the person who met you through letters?" Yes. Since he had already decided to surrender, his goal was only to ask Xiao Ju to let his wife and son go. Therefore, he told him everything, hoping that the man in front of him would be lenient. He said, "We sent a letter every month. The person who met me was in Shuajing. Then, you went to Jiang. That's all I know. If you want to find him, go to Jiang. You'll definitely find him." Jiang City. Xiao Ju muttered to himself and looked at him. Jiang City doesn't allow foreigners to stay for long. What identity did your person use to enter the city? "I don't know." Lei Ho said, "I only know that he lives in Jiang's Tsuiwei Pavilion." Tsuiwei Pavilion. Xiao Ju stood up and said, "I understand." Xiao Huaijin. Military Governor Xiao. Lei Ho stopped him and crawled 2 steps forward like a dog. He rushed in his direction and said, "I've already told you everything I know. Can you let go of my wife and son?" The handsome young man stopped at the door. He didn't turn around and said in a mocking tone, "There's no hurry. Maybe you'll remember something in a few days. It won't be too late to let them go then." He turned around and walked out. Chi-Wu was waiting outside the door. When he saw him, Chi-Wu said, "Young master, there's news from Wanning." Xiao Ju said, "Speak." "We found Chai Anchi's whereabouts. Chai Anchi is now in Jiang." "Jiang?" Xiao Ju turned around. Chi-Wu didn't know what happened in the dungeon. He hesitated and said, "Is there something wrong?" Fei Nu followed behind him and said with a serious expression, "The messenger Lei Ho mentioned is also in Jiang." "Young master, are you suspecting that?" Fei Nu was surprised. "The person who secretly met with Lei Ho is Chai Anchi?" "I can't be sure because I haven't seen him." But Chi-Wu couldn't help but ask. Jiang is a vassal state's territory. People outside the vassal state are not allowed to stay for long. Even if they want to stay for a short time, they need a pass. Even we can't go as we please. How did Chai Anchi get in? How could he stay in Jiang for so many days? Could it be a trap? Who knows? Lei Ho didn't say anything either. Fei Nu glanced at Xiao Ju's expression and asked carefully, "Young master, should we think of a way to go to Jiang first?" "That's easy for you to say." Chi-Wu poured cold water on him. When old master was still alive, he passed by Jiang and stayed there for a few days. However, King Mingji refused to let old master's soldiers enter the city. He said that we need a pass. We have to go to the magistrate's office to get the pass and report it to the palace. We can't make it public. What should we do? There's no hurry. Xiao Ju played with the longevity lock in his hand. Let's wait for a few more days. Chi-Wu and Fei Nu looked at each other. Fei Nu saw the longevity lock in his hand and remembered Lei Ho's words in the dungeon. He asked, "Young master, Lei Ho's wife and children are still being watched by our people. Should we continue?" Or, there were people in the capital who were watching Lei Ho's wife and children. Although they were locked up these days, they didn't do anything to harm them. News came from Jiang. Looking at Lei Ho's expression, it didn't seem like they could squeeze any more information out of him. How to deal with his wife and children was still a problem. Xiao Ju's gaze fell on the longevity lock in his hand. He laughed and casually threw it to Chi-Wu. "Chi-Wu, young master." He turned around and walked forward lazily. "Let it go." Chapter 123. This winter in the Liangzhou Guard was extremely cold. It snowed heavily for half of the month. Even if it wasn't snowing heavily, the sun rarely came out. There was a shortage of firewood and charcoal. Fortunately, after the new Liangzhou County Magistrate took office, he took the initiative to send some charcoal from the county government's warehouse to the guard office as a way to establish a good relationship with the Right Army's commander-in-chief. The new county magistrate was still very young and didn't have anyone to rely on at home. He looked gentle and weak, but he was very experienced and thoughtful. Lin Shuanghe was very satisfied with this new county magistrate. In the blink of an eye, 2 months had passed. The year was coming to an end. Soon, it would be the new year. After the new year, it would be another spring day. The new recruits of the Liangzhou Guard would no longer be called new recruits and spend the new year here. In the room, Xiao Ju was talking to Chi-Wu and Fei Nu. "There's another letter from the vassal territory." Chi-Wu took out a letter and handed it to Xiao Ju. "There's one every month. This is the second one." Other than the instructor, Chi-Wu, and He-Yin knew that Lei Ho had been captured and locked in the dungeon. The new recruits of the Liangzhou Guard didn't know. Thinking that Lei Ho had become a deserter, Xiao Ju ordered Lei Ho to continue communicating with the person hiding in Jiang. He lied that he had escaped from the Liangzhou Guard and was hiding from the soldiers chasing after him. He also asked what he should do next. The person in Jiang was very cunning. He didn't directly tell Lei Ho what to do in the letter. He only told Lei Ho to hide well and that his master would send someone to pick him up. Xiao Ju took out the letter and read it quickly. Then he handed it to Fei Nu. After Fei Nu and Chi Wu read it, their expressions turned ugly. The person in the letter said that since Muzi had been exposed, the Liangzhou guard's chess pieces were useless. He told Lei Ho to find a way to hide and wait for the storm to blow over before the people from Shuajing came to pick him up. After this letter, they should not continue to write to each other. In these troubled times, if they were to act rashly and alert the enemy and spoil the plans of their superiors, it would not be something that the two of them could bear. What should we do? Qi Wu said. Does this person mean that he won't send any more letters in the future? Xiaoju. Lei Ho is already useless. But Jiang. Fei Nu hesitated for a moment. Is the commander-in-chief planning to go to Jiang? Even if there wasn't a messenger, I would still make a trip there based on the fact that Chai Anshi is in Jiang. Xiaoju placed the letter on the burning candle on the table. The flame licked the letter, and in a moment, it turned into ashes. Chai Anshi was Xiao Zhongwu's former general. In the Battle of Mingshui, Xiao Zhongwu and the tens of thousands of soldiers he brought with him were all killed, including his generals. At that time, Chai Anshi's corpse was not found on the battlefield. However, everyone thought that he was most likely dead. A few years had passed, and Xiao Zhu had been sending people to secretly investigate Chai Anshi's whereabouts. Now his efforts had paid off. Chai Anshi was not dead, and he had even gone to Jiang incognito. Jiang was the territory of King Mengji. If people from outside Wei's territory wanted to enter the city, they had to obtain a pass from the government. Even if they obtained a pass, outsiders could not stay here for long. Chai Anshi had lived here for a long time, so it was no wonder that others could not find his whereabouts. But how do we go to Jiang? If we ask the government for a pass, Su Jingfu's people will be able to find out. Won't they be able to control our every move? Fei Nu asked. Xiao Zhu turned around, thought for a moment, and said, Do we use another method? Qi Wu. What method? Find someone who has a pass to go to Jiang and change their identity. This? Slave Fei was in a difficult position. When Meng Ji King was still alive, he was extremely strict on the way in and out. Even if there was a pass, there was also a record and a portrait of the person. Moreover, because it was very troublesome to enter the territory of the vassal state, the people of Wei dealt with it by not going there if they could. Throughout the year, there were very few people who had a pass to go to Jiang. There were not many people in the first place, and the customs were very strict. It was not easy to ask someone to change their identity with Xiao Zhu, even if they were not allowed to enter the territory again if they were found out. Let Luaning handle this, Xiao Zhu said to Qi Wu. Write a letter to Luaning immediately and tell her to prepare as soon as possible. Qi Wu. Yes. As they were talking, someone pushed open the door and entered. It was Lin Shuanghe. Qi Wu nodded at him. Young Master Lin. Lin Shuanghe also smiled at him. Fei Nu also tactfully left. Huaijin, what have you been busy with these days? Lin Shuanghe waved his fan. It's almost spring now. Do you know how many times I've seen you? Are you bored? Xiao Zhu said. When Cheng Li Su returns to the capital, you can go with her. Forget it. Since I'm already here, why should I go back? He said. When are they leaving? In 2 days. After the incident with Muzi, the Liangzhou guards were no longer safe. There might be changes in the future. It was not suitable for Cheng Li Su and Song Taotao to continue staying here. Xiao Zhu had already ordered people to leave for Shua in a few days. The two children were naturally unwilling and argued for a long time. However, with Xiao Zhu involved, there was no reason why it could not be done. No matter how dissatisfied they were, they could only accept Xiao Zhu's arrangement. I won't say anything about Cheng Li Su, but Song Taotao, that little girl, is actually willing to let go of He Yin? Lin Shuanghe said in disbelief. She almost grew up on He Yin? She's going to go back just like that? Why don't you ask her? Xiao Zhu sat down on a chair and poured himself a cup of tea. He drank lazily. He had been busy for a long time, but he only had a short break. Cheng Li Su sat on his soft couch and looked at him. It's fine if you ignore me. After all, we've known each other for so many years, so I won't argue with you. However, how can you ignore my Mimi? Although military matters are important, my Mimi is also important. Don't blame me for not warning you. If you continue like this, when Mimi is taken away by Chu Xilan, you won't have anyone to cry to. What does she have to do with me? Xiao Zhu frowned impatiently and said, What's wrong with Chu Xilan? Lin Shuanghe rested his chin on the handle of his fan and said calmly, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but for the past month, I've always seen Mimi and Chu Xilan talking together. She's a girl, and she's injured. She can't train every day and is bored. I don't know why Chu Xilan came to Liangzhou. It's already been 2 months, and he hasn't mentioned when he's leaving. He's bored, and Mimi's bored. When the two of them get together, they're already close. Anyway, Mimi used to call him Fourth Young Master Chu. 2 days ago, I heard her call Chu Xilan Brother Chu. If this continues, won't you panic? Xiao Zhu was confused. Why should I panic? Why don't you think about it? If younger sister he is kidnapped by Chu Xilan and used by Chu Xilan, the Liang province guards will have one less peerless genius in both civil and military strategy. You are pushing away a capable general. Xiao Zhu sneered. Do you think there's no one in the Liangzhou guards? Anyway, I've never seen a girl like her before, Lin Shuanghe said. Chu Xilan is used to pleasing girls. Originally, you were born better than him, and you're more capable than him. However, your personality is still more gentle and kind. Which girl wouldn't like to have such a good-looking, rich young master accompanying her gently every day? Like? Xiao Zhu's beautiful eyes narrowed, and her voice was filled with mockery. You're only 16 years old, yet you know what it means to like. So what if I'm 16 years old? Lin Shuang has said, in Shuo capital, many girls at 16 years old are already married. So? Xiao Zhu picked up her tea and took a sip. She said indifferently, at 16 years old, other than her father and brothers, how many men have she seen? Since she hasn't seen many men, how can she know what it means to like? Saying that she likes peonies after only seeing peonies is different from saying that she likes peonies after seeing hundreds of flowers. Liking when you have a choice is also different from liking when you don't have a choice. What you're saying is meaningless. Lin Shuanghe rolled his eyes. Most people in the world are normal people. Of course, they follow the rules of normal people. Normal people are like this. They get married at 16 and spend their lives together. It's not like they don't have a lifetime of happiness. There are even more unhappy people. Xiao Zhu said, normal people don't have a choice, but I do. Lin Shuanghe was completely speechless. He said, okay. You have it. But according to what you said, the only girl you can find who's seen hundreds of flowers is Mimi. He didn't just see hundreds of flowers in the Liang province guards. There are tens of thousands of men in the Liang province guards, and she's also seen tens of thousands of flowers. If she sees tens of thousands of flowers and likes you, that's great. But if she sees tens of thousands of flowers and likes Chu Xilan, Lin Shuanghe gloated, wouldn't that be a huge blow to you? You're thinking too much. Xiao Zhu said, whoever she likes has nothing to do with me. However, Chu Xilan is Su Jingfu's son-in-law. She can like Chu Xilan. Xiao Zhu's lips curved, as long as she's not afraid of death. Lin Shuanghe was stunned. Oh, right. I almost forgot. Chu Xilan is Su Pingting's man. When Lin Shuanghe and Xiao Zhu talked about Chu Xilan, Yin had just arrived at Chu Xilan's door. Ying Xiang smiled and welcomed her in, saying, Young master, you're here. Then, she looked behind her and said jokingly, Miss Song didn't follow me today. Thank goodness. Song Taodao guarded Ying Xiang tightly. As soon as Yin went to find Chu Zhao, Song Taodao would be alert and follow him. After all, Ying Xiang was beautiful and charming. She wasn't as cold and aloof as Shinmu Xue. To men, she was more attractive. She's packing her things. Yin smiled. In a few days, she'll be leaving the Liang province guards. She can't follow me around every day. Speaking of this, Yin felt a headache coming on. When Song Taodao found out that she was going to return to Shuajing, she cried and threw a tantrum, unwilling to leave no matter what. She and Cheng Lisu reached an unprecedented agreement and almost tore off the roof of the Liang province guards. In the end, Xiao Zhu had to personally come out and subdue the two children. Only then did she agree to follow Xiao Zhu back to the capital. That wasn't all. but Song Taodao even tried to take He Yin with her. Whatever second young master Xiao promised you, my Song family will triple it. Don't stay in the Liang province guards. The little girl looked at her with disdain. The Liang province guards is such a cold place. If you're not careful, you'll lose your life. I heard Chung Lisu say that if you want to make a name for yourself, why do you have to walk this path? You've risked your life here and haven't even been promoted. Too pitiful. He Yin thought, yes, too pitiful. My Song family is different, Song Taodao said seriously. Although my father can't call the wind and summon the rain in the capital, he can still help you a bit. You'll have a much better future in my Song family than in Liang province. As for the military registry, you don't have to worry. As long as I tell my father, he'll find a way to set you free. He Yin? No, I'm fine in Liang province. Song Taotao's gaze was like a knife. Don't tell me you don't want to let go of that maid called Ing Xiang? The little girl was young, but she was quite shrewd. Ian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That's not it. It's just that my status in the Liang province guards is special. If Miss Song wants me, you can go directly to Military Governor Xiao. If Military Governor Xiao is willing to let me go, of course I'll follow Miss Song back to the capital. Would Xiao Ju let him go so easily? Of course not. The Liang province guards weren't the backup army of the capital's son-in-law. If she took the lead, what would the other recruits think? It was better to curry favor with a rich young lady than to fight to the death. If this continued, the Liang province guards wouldn't even need to be attacked by the enemy. Once the soldiers' morale dropped, they would be gone in 2 years. Xiao Ju wouldn't let that happen. Bringing up Xiao Ju was still quite shocking to the little girl. Song Taodao immediately gave up and no longer mentioned bringing He Yin back to the capital. She walked into the room and saw Chu Zhao feeding the birds. He Yin felt that Chu Xilan was a very interesting person. If he wasn't gardening, he was writing, and if he wasn't writing, he was feeding the birds. His life was like that of an old man in his 60s or 70s in the capital. However, he had stayed in the Liang province guards for 2 months. Since he was so carefree, wouldn't it be better to go to the capital and relax? Why come here to suffer? There wasn't even a lot of coal here. However, even so, He Yin was still willing to run over to Chu Xilan's room. There was no other reason. Chu Zhao was a very patient person. He Yin couldn't go to the practice field to train anyway. It was good to listen to Chu Zhao talk about the interesting things in the capital. In her previous life, she had been fighting outside. When she returned to the capital, He Rufei had replaced her. She didn't know much about the Shuo capital's officialdom. She didn't know much about her colleagues. In the past, it was fine. However, after doing a few things with Xiao Ju, He Yin knew that if she really wanted to start over, she had to know the power structure of each party. At least she knew the general situation of the Crown Prince's faction, Prime Minister Su's faction, and Xiao Ju's faction. He Yin learned a lot from Chu Zhao. She didn't want to be too hostile towards Chu Zhao. Moreover, this person really didn't do anything to her in the beginning. Today, it was Chu Zhao who ordered Ing Xiang to come over and talk to He Yin. Brother Chu, she said. Chu Zhao put the last bit of bird food into the bowl. The bird flapped its wings and let out a clear cry. This kind of cold weather was really not suitable for raising birds. Therefore, Chu Zhao placed all of his charcoal near the bird cage. He was also very considerate and gentle towards birds. You're here. Chu Zhao smiled as he walked to the basin to wash his hands. Brother Chu, why did you ask Ing Xiang to come find me today? He Yin asked tentatively. Normally, He Yin was the one who took the initiative to talk to Chu Zhao. It was rare for Chu Zhao to take the initiative, so there must be something important. It's nothing. Chu Zhao smiled as he invited He Yin to sit down. I might be going back to the capital in a few days. Before I leave, I want to say goodbye to Brother He. He Yin was startled. You're going back? That's right. Chu Zhao smiled. I've already stayed in Liangzhou for 2 months. It's a long journey. By the time I get back, it will already be spring. He said, I'm indebted to Brother He for taking care of me these past 2 months in Liangzhou. It was very interesting. Brother He is very considerate. You're too kind. He Yin hurriedly said, it's not me taking care of you. It's you taking care of me. The people who will come to pick me up will probably arrive in a few days. Chu Zhao smiled. I don't think it will snow for the next few days. Why don't we set up a pavilion banquet on Baiwa Mountain and drink farewell wine with Brother He? The commander-in-chief doesn't allow us to go up the mountain without permission. He was in a difficult position. Brother Chu also knows that I can't hold my liquor well. If I get drunk, it will inevitably cause trouble. When Chu Zhao heard this, he smiled and shook his head. It's fine. We won't go up the mountain. There's a pavilion at the foot of Baiwa Mountain. From there, you can overlook the Wulu River and see the best moonlight. It's fine at the foot of the mountain. As for wine, even if Brother He wants to drink, I don't have any. I'll use tea in place of wine. It's fine as long as you're sincere. Since he had already said it like this, Hien didn't have any reason to decline. He straightforwardly replied, Of course it's fine. Since Brother Chu is leaving, I naturally should accompany you. When will the pavilion banquet that Brother Chu mentioned be held? I'll make some preparations. Tonight will be fine. Chu Zhao smiled. If it snows at night, there won't be a good moonlight tomorrow. Hien said, Tonight it is. Tonight, I'll definitely talk to Brother Chu all night long. She thought. Chu Zhao was about to leave. In the future, who would be able to explain to her the intricate and complicated relationships between the various officials in the capital? It would be better to take advantage of tonight to get as much information as possible so that it wouldn't be difficult to find such an opportunity in the future. Chu Zhao smiled. Brother He is straightforward. That's right. Hien thought of something. Brother Chu, why do you suddenly want to go back? Didn't you say before that you wanted to stay until the spring weather warmed up a bit before leaving? If you leave now, I'm afraid the journey will be cold. I can't help it. Chu Zhao smiled somewhat helplessly. It's my colleague, Hamlin Academy scholar Su Darren, who is getting married. I have to rush back to the capital to attend the wedding banquet. Hien was holding the teacup on the table to warm her hands. When she heard this, she froze. She felt her palms become cold, and her heart gradually sank. She almost couldn't control her expression. She stiffly pulled the corners of her mouth and asked, Su Darren? Which Su Darren? His name is Su Zhiheng, the eldest son of the crown prince's grand tutor. Chu Zhao curiously said, Haven't I told you about him? This person is erudite and multi-talented. He's well-read and is very outstanding. The steaming hot tea suddenly froze into ice. Hien's fingers curled slightly. Su Zhiheng. Hien didn't know how she returned to the room. She also couldn't remember what Chu Zhao said after that. She only remembered that she tried her best not to reveal any of her emotions, so that others wouldn't notice any flaws. When she returned to the room, she almost couldn't stand properly. She held the head of the bed and slowly sat down on the bed. Chu Zhao's words just now echoed in her mind. Su Darren once had a wife. His eldest brother-in-law is the current General Fei Hong, He Rufei. He Rufei's cousin, the daughter of the He family, married Su Zhiheng for half a year. She lost her sight due to an illness. However, Su Darren didn't dislike his first wife because of this. He searched everywhere for famous doctors and was very considerate. Hien asked, Very considerate? That's right. At that time, the Su family's madam hoped that Su Darren would take a concubine or find another wife for him. Su Darren flatly refused. Unfortunately, Su Darren was unlucky. This spring, when she was alone in the manor, the servants didn't notice and she accidentally fell into the pond and drowned. Su Darren passed away almost a year ago. Su Darren originally told his relatives and friends that he wouldn't marry again in the future. However, he was still young. How could the Su family let him be a widower for the rest of his life? He was so affectionate that even his deceased wife's family couldn't stand it. They chose another young lady from the He family to be engaged to him. She was the daughter of the He family's second branch. She was 3 years younger than the original Su Darren. She was only 17 this year. The daughter of the He family's second branch was only 17 this year. Hien closed his eyes. That was her biological younger sister. The He family had already planned this. Perhaps it was the result of their discussion with Su Zhiheng. Hien had to die. However, once Hien died, the relationship between the He family and the Su family would disappear. This was the result that neither family wanted to see. It was better to exchange one person for the other. Tian's death for a new Sue Darren. She held her head. She felt like her head was about to explode. Suddenly, someone's voice sounded. "Big brother? What's wrong?" Ian looked up. It was Chung Li Sue. She asked, "Why are you here?" The young boy said, "I knocked on the door for a long time. No one answered. I thought you weren't here, so I came to give you some snacks." He went forward with concern. "Big brother, you don't look well. Is your wound hurting? Do you want me to call Uncle Lin?" Ian waved his hand and forced a smile. "No need. I didn't sleep well last night. I'm a bit sleepy." Chung Li Sue didn't doubt him. She nodded. "Okay." She thought of something and curled her lips. "Big brother, you seem to be very busy these days. I have to go back to Shuajing soon. I don't know when we'll meet again. A few days ago, I learned a puppet show with a stick from Coach Ma. How about I show you tonight?" Tian's mind was filled with Chu Zhao's words. How could she be in the mood to talk to Chung Li Sue? Moreover, she still remembered her promise with Chu Zhao. She shook her head. "Not tonight. I've already made plans with fourth young Master Chu. We're going to the foot of Mount Baiyue to see the moon." "Why are two men looking at the moon?" Chung Li Sue said unhappily. "Besides, how can the moon compare to a puppet show? Don't you see it every day? What's so strange about it?" His ruckus actually pulled Yan's attention back a little. She patiently explained, "It's not just to see the moon. It's just that fourth young Master Chu will be leaving the Liang Province Guard in a few days, so before he leaves, he wants to drink with me. It's good that you have a good relationship with fourth young Master Chu. Don't forget about me." Chung Li Sue didn't know about the undercurrent between Xiao Ju and Chu Zhao. To her, Chu Zhao was just a good-looking, good-tempered uncle who came from Shuajing with a gift from the emperor. She said, "After all, I've known you for a long time. It's reasonable for you to be more familiar with me. Big brother, you can't abandon me." She was just a little brat. Tian could only coax her. "I know. Today I'll drink with him. Tomorrow I'll see your puppet show. What do you think?" Chung Li Sue was satisfied. She giggled. "That's more like it." Chapter 124. After lunch, the soldiers all looked for a warm place to rest for a while. Xiao Ju was talking to the deputy commander in the practice field. He was giving instructions for the next month's training. Lin Xuanghe walked over and waved his fan at him from a distance, indicating that he wanted to talk to him in private. Xiao Ju finished giving instructions and walked towards Lin Xuanghe. As he walked, he said impatiently, "Didn't you go to the medical center to help?" Lin Xuanghe had nothing to do all day. Recently, the weather had been cold. Shen Muxue took out a large pot of medicinal soup to warm the stomach and distributed it to everyone. Because there were not enough people, Lin Xuanghe volunteered to help. He had always been a gentleman and thought that the soldiers of the Liangzhou Guard did not bathe and smell bad. After helping for 2 days, he gave up. "I was going to go, but I met someone on the way. A guest came to the Liangzhou Guard," he said. Xiao Ju asked who. Lin Xuanghe's face showed a meaningful smile. Su Pingting's personal maid. Inside the room, a young maid stood in front of the door with a smile. She ordered the servant to open the boxes in the room one by one. She said, "These are the gifts that Miss personally chose for fourth young master." The current Prime Minister Su Jingfu had great power. Half of the officials in the court were his students. He had lived for most of his life and had a good reputation. The emperor trusted him. If there was anything he regretted, it would be that he did not have a son. Later, he found a famous doctor to treat him. When he was in his 50s, his wife finally gave birth to a daughter, Su Pingting. He only had this precious daughter when he was old. The Su family was almost completely obedient to Su Pingting. Even the princess was not as pampered as her. Su Pingting was 17 years old this year. She was also a charming little beauty, but her personality was particularly domineering, making it hard for others to resist. Chu Zhao was Su Jingfu's favorite student. He often went to eat with the Su family. After a while, he became familiar with Su Pingting. Little sister, Mo Tai must be tired from the long journey. Ing Xiang smiled as she handed over a cup of tea and said, "Drink some tea to warm your body." Mo Tai glanced at Ing Xiang and said with a fake smile, "Forget it. This servant is not used to the crude tea of the Liang province guards." Xiang was not annoyed. She still had a smile on her face as she took the tea away. Emotai looked at Xiang's back, and a trace of contempt flashed across her eyes. She cursed in her heart. Was such a vixen by fourth young Master Chu's side every day, who knew if she would use her seductive methods on his master. Although eldest Miss Su was young and beautiful, she was no match for this bitch when it came to pleasing others. It was not that Su Pingning had never thought of driving Xiang away from Chu Zhao. Unfortunately, Chu Zhao, who had always been gentle, flatly refused to do so. In the end, Prime Minister Su had to personally step in and cover up the matter. Wasn't he just a servant? Was there a need to protect him like this? Emotai was dissatisfied, but she could not vent it on Chu Zhao. She looked around Chu Zhao's room. After a while, she shook her head and said, "The place where fourth young master lives is really too shabby. This servant has only stayed here for a short while, but my hands and feet feel cold. There isn't even a charcoal fire here. It seems that fourth young master has suffered these past 2 months." "It's no problem," Chu Zhao replied gently. "The new recruits here are all like this. How can they compare to you?" Emotai said, "You can't compare yourself to that lowly bitch." A trace of coldness flashed through Chu Zhao's eyes. When he raised his head again, his expression was gentle again. He asked, "Miss Emotai, have you come here for something?" "It's nothing," Emotai said with a smile. "It's just that Miss hasn't seen fourth young master for a long time and misses him. She heard that Liang province is extremely cold in winter and ordered this servant to bring some warm clothing to fourth young master with the carriages." She bent down and took out a fur coat from the chest. She carried it to Chu Zhao and said, "Miss personally ordered people to buy this from merchants. It can be worn to keep out the cold. Fourth young master, do you want to try it?" The fur of the fur coat was smooth and clean, soft and light. It was obvious that it was expensive. Chu Zhao stood up and put on the fur coat. He smiled and thanked her. "It's very warm. Please thank eldest miss for me." Emotai covered her mouth and smiled. "This servant cannot do it for you. If you want to thank her, fourth young master should personally say it to eldest Mississippi." She seemed to have thought of something and asked Chu Zhao, "When does fourth young master plan on returning to Shuo capital?" "It's in these 2 days. This servant thinks that Liang province is not a place for people to stay. If eldest miss was here, she would definitely feel sorry for fourth young master. How about you set out tomorrow? The earlier you set out, the earlier you can return to Shuo capital. And the earlier you can see eldest Mississippi." She smiled slightly. Before this servant left, Master even mentioned fourth young master to eldest Mississippi, although she was probing. Her tone was unquestionable. She had already made her decision. She did not allow Chu Zhao to refute. Chu Zhao paused for a moment, then raised his head and smiled. "Okay, we'll set out tomorrow. I also miss teacher." "That's great." Emotai's face suddenly bloomed like a flower. She urged the servant to take out the things in the box. "This box is full of winter clothes. This servant will take them out for you first." "After I'm done, I'll help you pack your luggage for tomorrow's departure," she said. "I hope fourth young master won't blame this servant for being nosy." "How could I?" Chu Zhao smiled. "I can't thank you enough." Xiang stood behind the curtain and looked at the arrogant Emotai in the room. She lowered her gaze and stood quietly for a moment before walking away. It was a winter evening, and the sky turned dark very early. The lights in the room were lit up. Lin Shuangao lay on the bed and spat out the melon seed in his mouth. What's wrong with Su Pingting's maid? She talked to Chu Zhao from day to night and didn't let him leave? Those who don't know would think that she's the real eldest young Miss Su. Isn't it too obvious that she's announcing her ownership? Right now, I feel that Chu's island is a bit pitiful. Xiaoju was sitting at the table and reading military documents. When she heard this, she said, "If he's pitiful, you can go and rescue him. Then forget it." Lin Shuang'a sat up and put his hands behind his head. Who's to blame? It's all Chu's island's fault. Who told him to be good-looking and gentle? A man like that would be fought over in the capital. He even tried to curry favor with Su Jingfu. It's expected that eldest young Miss Su would like him. Xiao Zhu smiled. If he can really become the son-in-law of the Su family, then that's his ability. That's true. Lin Shuang had deeply agreed with Xiao Zhu's words. He was originally ostracized and bullied in Count Shi Jin's residence. If it wasn't for Su Jingfu, how could he be registered under Di Mother's name? If he really marries the eldest young miss of the Su family, Lin Shuang has said, Chu's Island will be in charge of Count Shi Jin's residence in the future. Everyone said that women fawned over those in power, and that if they found a good husband, they would be able to lean against a big tree and enjoy the shade. Who knew if men were different? When there were benefits in front of them, all of their choices were for the sake of living a better life. Whether they liked someone or not, whether they were willing or not, whether they were sincere or not, none of that mattered. It wasn't clear whether it was Su Pingting's sorrow or Chu's silence. I think that maid was lying when she said she would take care of him. She was really monitoring him. Lin Shuang has spread out his hands. Chu's Island won't be able to sleep tonight. Chu's Island? Chung Li Su's head poked in through the window. What's wrong with him? Didn't he go to see the moon with my eldest brother tonight? What do you mean, see the moon? Lin Shuang asked. We went to the foot of Mount Baiyue to see the moon. I originally wanted to find my eldest brother to watch the puppet show I just learned, but my eldest brother said that he would go see the moon with fourth young Master Chu tonight, so I could only reschedule it to tomorrow. Chung Li Su looked at Lin Shuanghe, then at Xiao Zhu. Uncle, what did you mean by what you said just now? Xiao Zhu pushed his head back out of the window and closed it. Go back to sleep. Chung Li Su smashed the window outside to no avail. After a while, he could only leave. After he left, Lin Shuanghe rubbed his chin and asked, My younger sister, he and Chu Xilan are going to see the moon tonight? Their relationship is developing so quickly. Xiao Zhu continued to read the military documents, too lazy to pay attention to him. No, Lin Shuanghe crawled up from the bed. I have to go take a look. He walked directly to the door between the two rooms, knocked on the door, and said, Brother He? Brother He? Brother He, are you there? Let me know if you are. He put his ear to the other side of the door, but it was quiet inside. There was no sound. Lin Shuanghe knocked a few more times, but there was still no response. He took 2 steps back and said to himself, My younger sister, he doesn't know that Su Pingting's people are here, so she went to see the moon by herself, right? Why, Jean? He shouted. Xiao Zhu's ears hurt from his shout. He said impatiently, What? My younger sister, he might have gone to see the moon by herself. Lin Shuanghe walked in front of him. Go and look for her. I'm not going, Xiao Zhu said indifferently. If you want to go, you go. I want to go, but Mount Baiyue is so big and I don't know the way. What if it's like what happened with Rida Musi and there are bad people on the mountain? You have martial arts, so you can protect yourself. If I go, I can only lie down and let them kill me. Won't you regret it if I die? Xiao Zhu said. No, I won't. Why are you like this? Lin Shuanghe sat on his desk blocking Junwen. He tried his best to persuade him. Look at my younger sister, she's so pitiful. Chu Zhao doesn't know that she's a girl, so he's gentle to everyone. But this is the first time younger sister, he has met such a gentle person. Girls are very sensitive and are easily moved. But her identity can't be exposed, so she can only hide this love in her heart. Her sweetheart asked her to see the moon, so she must be very happy. But she doesn't know that her sweetheart is already someone else's son-in-law. Now she's alone on the mountain, so she must be very cold and sad. Can't you go and see her? Comfort her? Xiao Zhu was puzzled by his idea. She likes Chu Xilan, and I'm going to comfort her? What kind of logic is that? Now is a good time for you. Lin Shuanghe encouraged him. Now is the best time to take advantage of her. Xiao Zhu sneered. Then I won't go. Okay, Lin Shuanghe said. Let's not talk about feelings. She's your soldier, and you're her superior. Younger sister, he helped you protect the Liangzhou guards a while ago, so you should care about your subordinates. I'm her superior, not her father, Xiao Zhu said coldly. Besides, she has legs. If she can't wait for him, she'll come back. Lin Shuanghe was silent for a moment, then asked him, Do you think she's the kind of person who will give up if she can't wait? Xiao Ju's hand that was holding the pen paused. The image of the youth running with a sandbag on his back in the martial arts arena appeared in his mind. Ian wasn't the kind of person who gave up easily. Sometimes she was clever and cunning, but sometimes she was stubborn and persistent. It was hard to say whether she was stubborn or stupid, but Lin Shuanghe was right. With her personality, there was an 80 to 90% chance that she would wait for him on the mountain for the entire night. She was crazy. Seeing that Xiao Ju's attitude had softened, Lin Shuanghe immediately added fuel to the fire. Think about it, she's only 16 years old. It's already not easy for a little girl like her to get to where she is now in the Liangzhou Guards. Now that Chu Xilan gave her such a blow, she's too pitiful. Just treat it as a good thing. Go up the mountain and bring her back. She'll be grateful to you, and she'll have to be more sincere when she works for you in the future. Seeing that Xiao Ju didn't move, Lin Shuanghe added fuel to the fire. When Madame Xiao was alive, she was the most benevolent and soft-hearted person. If she saw a little sister, she'd definitely help. Shut up. Xiao Ju couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the cloak beside him, stood up, and walked out the door. I'll go. Lin Shuanghe looked at his back, extremely satisfied. Now that's a real man. At the foot of Mount Baiwei, there was a huge rock. The huge rock was flat and extended, and it looked like a stone platform. Walking down the stone platform, one could hear the sound of waves at the end. Looking down, one could see the majestic river below. Looking up, one could see the bright moon thousands of li away, illuminating the mountains and rivers. Ian sat down at the end of the Shirtu. The sound of water splashing against the rocks in the distance. It was as if the deep, ancient sound came from a distant time and space, distant and drawn out. She had arranged to meet with Chu Zhao at 9 o'clock, but she didn't know what time it was. There was still no sign of him. She did find the pavilion that Chu Zhao mentioned, but there were no dishes or snacks in the pavilion, so she didn't know what was going on. Perhaps she should go down and look for Chu Zhao, but once she sat down here, she didn't want to get up again. The forest was covered in snow, and the vast expanse of whiteness covered the mountains. The moonlight shone on the river, clear and carefree. This was an extremely beautiful moonlight, and also an extremely beautiful snow. Ian felt tired. Hugging her knees, she sat and looked at the end of the river. She liked the night more than the day, and she liked the moon more than the sun. This was because when she was He Rufei, the mask never left her body. However, the mask was stuffy and heavy, and she was naughty. She would always secretly take off the mask in the middle of the night for a stick of incense to burn. No one could see her true appearance under the mask, except for the moon outside the window. She stretched out her hand, trying to catch the moonlight hanging in the distant mountains and rivers. The moonlight gently fell on her hand, as if it would stay for her forever. "What are you doing?" Someone's voice came from behind her. Ian turned around and saw a young man wearing a fox fur coat and embroidered clothes coming from the depths of the night. He was very tall, and he looked cold and handsome. It was Xiao Ju. Ian was startled and subconsciously looked behind him. Xiao Ju saw her and sneered. "Chu Xilan is not coming." "Why?" Ian asked. Xiao Ju looked at her and said, "Someone from the capital is here. He has something to do and can't leave. He asked me to pass on the message." Ian nodded and looked at him in surprise. The governor is actually passing on a message for fourth young Master Chu. Xiao Ju and Chu Zhao were like fire and water. It was already incredible that Chu Zhao asked Xiao Ju to pass on a message. It was even more shocking that Xiao Ju actually listened to him and came here to find her. "You still care about this? It seems like you're not very sad," he said and sat down on the other side of the huge rock. The winter night wind blew, and it was extremely cold. Ian asked, "Why should I be sad?" As soon as she finished speaking, she sneezed. Although it was winter clothing, it was still unbearably cold to come out at night to be blown by the wind. She sat stiffly, her face pale from the cold, like a piece of green jade, with a kind of fragility. Xiao Ju was silent for a moment. The next moment, she stood up. Just as Yin was about to raise her head, a fox fur coat covered her head, causing her vision to darken. When she came out of the fox fur coat, Xiaoju had already returned to her original position and sat down. The fur coat was slightly warm and blocked the wind and snow. Hien was stunned for a long time before she said, "Thank you." Xiaoju turned her head and glanced at her. The young girl's hair was tied up, and she was wearing his black fur coat. Her shoulders were very narrow, and she looked very frail. She used to be noisy and chatty all day long, and only felt that it was a headache. However, when she was quiet, it was as if she had turned into another person. It made people feel uncomfortable. Xiaoju lowered her eyes and looked at her. After a while, she smiled. "You look so bitter and resentful. It's really ugly." She paused and said, "You can't bear to leave Chu's island?" "What?" Hien was confused. "I didn't see you this depressed even when you were about to die," she said lazily. "It seems like you like him very much." Hien didn't understand what she was saying. "He hasn't left yet, and you're already so depressed." "What will you do when he leaves tomorrow?" Xiaoju looked at the river in the distance. "Tomorrow?" Hien was shocked. "So soon?" She remembered that Chu Zhao told her that it would be one of these days. He didn't say that it would be tomorrow. Xiaoju looked at her with a half-smile. "Are you anxious?" "No," Hien said. "I'm just a little surprised." She thought of something and said sadly, "Well, he has to make it in time for Su, Master Su's wedding. He has to leave as soon as possible." Hien asked Xiaoju, "Do you know the young master of the Su family in Beijing?" Xiaoju said, "I've heard of him. Su Zhiheng is getting married." Fourth young master Chu rushed back just to make it in time for his wedding. Hien's voice was dry. "The one getting married is Su Zhiheng, not Chu's island." Xiaoju frowned. "Look at how useless you are now. You still want to join the Nine Flags Battalion?" Hien forced a smile. Just as she was about to speak, Xiaoju waved her sleeve and threw something into her arms. Hien looked down. It was a stick of tonghulu. It had been outside for a long time and was as cold as ice. It was bright red in the snow. "Where did you get this?" "It's Song Tao Tao's," Xiaoju said. "I just took a stick of it." He didn't know how to coax a girl. Before he left, he asked Lin Shuanghe. Lin Shuanghe replied, "If it were someone else, they would have to spend a lot of effort to coax a sad girl. They would have to take her to see the lanterns, the flowers, the stars, and buy jade, pearls, and gold hairpins. But it's different for you. All you have to do is sit there and use your face." Xiaoju was speechless. When she passed by Shin Mushue's room, she saw the tonghulu that Song Taodao had asked someone to buy for her by the window. She casually took a stick of it. The last time she saw her eating it, she was very happy. Hien picked up the tonghulu, removed the rice cake wrapper, and licked it. The tonghulu was cold, and a little sweetness spread along the tip of her tongue. It was so sweet that it made her heart feel bitter. She suddenly remembered the words she said to Chu Zhao. She asked Chu Zhao, "What's the name of the new young Mistress Su?" Chu Zhao replied, "He's Xining. She's the second daughter of the He family's second branch. She's a cousin of the previous young Mistress He. I've met her once. She's innocent and gentle. She's a good match for young Mistress Su." "He's Xining," Hien muttered. "Do you know the name of the previous young Mistress Su?" Chu Zhao was stunned. He hesitated for a moment and shook his head. The previous young mistress, Su, lived in seclusion. She wasn't in Shuajing before. I've never seen her before. I don't know her name either. She didn't even leave a name. The world remembered General Fei Hong, He Rufei, Su Zhiheng, and even Su Zhiheng's new wife. However, no one remembered Hien. She thought that after so long, she would know Su Zhiheng's true colors and would no longer feel heartache. However, the moment she heard that he was going to marry a new wife, she still felt a strange pain. It was as if the persistence and trust from many years ago had collapsed overnight. She didn't even bother to leave behind a lie. All that was left was her stupidity and unwillingness. She raised her head and looked at the moon. The gentle moonlight spread over the barren mountains and rivers, over the snowy forest, over her desolate and lonely years, and over her eyes under the mask. The moon knew her secret, but the moon couldn't speak. "Do you know?" She opened her mouth, her voice soft. "What's the name of Su Zhiheng's new wife?" Xiaoju lazily said. How would I know? Hien laughed self-deprecatingly and asked again, Then do you know what the name of the previous young Mistress Su was? The waves of the river slapped against the reefs, as if they had been separated by a long time. He glanced at Hien indifferently. His eyebrows were unbelievably handsome under the moonlight. A trace of mockery appeared in his limpid eyes. He said indifferently, Why? Do you want to be young Mistress Su just because they have the same name? Hien was stunned. Do you know her name? Her heart began to beat wildly. Hien. The waves fell on the reefs and were broken into tiny droplets of water that merged into the river. It was impossible to tell where the waves came from. However, Hien's name was remembered. Hien suddenly raised her head and looked at him. Do you know? Have you seen young Mistress Su? She said in her heart that it was impossible. She and Xiaoju were schoolmates for less than a year before they went their separate ways. When she returned to Shuajing, she became Lady He and was no longer He Rufei. She was quickly engaged and didn't even leave the house a few times, let alone a man. When she married into the Su family, she became blind not long after her marriage. She stayed in the house all day and was almost isolated from the world. How could Xiaoju have seen her? Unless I have. The young man sat lazily. His eyebrows were charming, and the mountains and rivers were not as bright as the light in his eyes. For a moment, his voice overlapped with the voice of a certain night. It was also a night like this with mountains like this. The rain continued to fall, and her world was dark and gloomy. It was only a hair's breadth away from despair. Xiaoju said, She owes me a candy. Chapter 125. The Mid-Autumn Festival in the 62nd year of Qingyuan was the coldest mid-autumn festival in Dawei. It had been raining since the morning, and the clouds were heavy. Looking at the situation, it seemed like it would rain for an entire day. Mount Lianxue was a chaotic mountain with many peaks. Because of the rain, the fog was thick and the mountain path was difficult to travel on. The carriage slowly passed on the mountain path. Even on such a difficult mountain path, Mount Lianxue was bustling all year round. This was because there was a spiritual temple on the mountain called Yuhua. Yuhua Temple was very popular. It was said that anyone who worshipped Buddha there could have their wishes fulfilled. This was an exaggeration, but Yuhua Temple had existed for hundreds of years. It was a true ancient temple. The officials and nobles of Shuo City were all willing to come here to pray during festivals, to pray for their families to be safe and happy. The curtain of the carriage was lifted. Xiao family's eldest young mistress, by Rongwei, looked outside and said softly, Soon, we will reach Yuhua Temple in less than half an hour. Are you hungry? Xiao Jing asked warmly beside her. Bai Rongwei shook her head and looked at the carriage behind her. She was a little worried. Huijin, Xiao Jing sighed softly and didn't say anything. Xiao family knew that second young master Xiao didn't like the Mid-Autumn Festival. He even hated it. Xiao Zhongwu died on the battlefield, and it was the Mid-Autumn Festival soon. If he was still alive, he would have come back to spend the Mid-Autumn Festival with his family. Unfortunately, he died in the Battle of Mingshui before the Mid-Autumn Festival arrived. Xiao family's Mid-Autumn Festival banquet was prepared halfway and stopped abruptly. It didn't continue. Ever since the Xiao family couple passed away, Xiaoju wasn't in Shuojing every Mid-Autumn Festival. This year was his first Mid-Autumn Festival in Shuojing since he took over the Southern Prefecture Army. Xiao family also followed the rules when Madame Xiao was still alive. They burned incense and prayed at Mount Lianxue's Yuhua Temple during the Mid-Autumn Festival. However, they didn't expect the weather to be so bad today. Not only was there no sun, but the rain didn't stop. Just as Bai Rongwei had said, in less than half an hour, they could see the door of Yuhua Temple. A monk wearing a bamboo hat was sweeping the fallen leaves on the ground. When he saw the Xiao family's carriage arrive, he put down the broom in his hand and welcomed them into the temple. Because of the rain today, the mountain path was difficult to travel on. In the past, at this time of the year, Yuhua Temple would have been bustling with activity. However, Today, other than the carriage of the Xiao family, there was only one other carriage parked outside the mountain gate. It was unknown which family it belonged to. Xiao Ju followed them inside. The sky was dark. Although it was afternoon, it looked as if it was already evening. They followed the monks in the temple to have a vegetarian meal first, and then went to the Buddha hall to burn incense and pray for blessings. Bai Rongwei and Xiao Ju went in first. When it was Xiao Ju's turn, the monk in green reached out his hand to stop him. He said, "Almsgiver, you cannot go in." Bai Rongwei and Xiao Jing turned around. Bai Rongwei asked why. "This is my younger brother. We went up the mountain to pray for blessings together." The monk in green put his palms together and bowed to her. He then turned to Xiao Ju, lowered his head and said, "Benefactor, you have killed too many people. The Buddhist temple is a peaceful place, not a place for those whose hearts are stained with blood." They were startled. He had killed too many people. In the Battle of Gua City's Long Valley, 60,000 people were drowned. Wasn't that because he had killed too many people? Over the years, countless people from the southern barbarians had died at his hands. His heart was indeed stained with blood. "Master," Bai Rongwei was anxious. "Buddha saves all living beings. How can there be a distinction between high and low? Although his hands are stained with blood, he has saved many lives." Xiao Jing frowned. "Master, your words are too one-sided." The monk in green lowered his eyes and said nothing. "Master, please be tolerant," Bai Rongwei pleaded. "Our Xiao family is willing to pay more incense, as long as my brother can also enter the Buddha hall to pray." "There's no need." Someone's voice interrupted her. The young man in the brocade robe looked up, and his gaze fell on the Buddha hall. In the Buddha hall, a golden Buddha statue sat cross-legged. There was a fierce Vajra with angry eyes and a serene Vairocana. From top to bottom, from far to near, they looked down at him with pity. The Sanskrit Nyao Nyao. The sea of bitterness was boundless, and Buddha could not be saved. He should have expected this ending. "He can't save me." Xiao Ju raised the corner of her mouth. "I don't want to look back." It was not impossible to sink into oblivion like this. He turned and walked out. "I'll wait for you outside." Bai Rongwei and Xiao Jing's shouts came from behind him. He frowned impatiently and turned to leave everything behind. He didn't know that after he left, the monk in green chanted the name of Buddha and whispered, "It may not be fated." Because it was raining, the road down the mountain was more slippery than the road up the mountain. The sky was dark, and it would be inappropriate to go down the mountain after praying. Tonight, they could only stay at Yuhua Temple. Sleeping outside on the Mid-Autumn Festival was also a helpless matter. The monk arranged a room for Bai Rongwei and the others and left. Bai Rongwei sighed. On the table was a moon ball specially made by Yuhua Temple. She said to Xiao Jing, "Go and call Huaijin." Let's reluctantly spend the Mid-Autumn Festival here. Xiao Jing went to the next room and knocked on the door. For a long time, no one answered. He pushed the door and entered. The room was empty. Xiao Ju was not in the room. He looked at the courtyard of the temple. The rain washed the stone slabs clean. It was raining. Where did Xiao Ju go? In the backyard of Yuhua Temple, there was an ancient tree. Yuhua Temple had been here since it was built. No one knew how many hundreds of years it had lived. The ancient tree had a spirit. Its branches and leaves were luxuriant. The believers who came to offer incense called it the immortal tree. The immortal tree was hung with red silk ribbons. Some prayed for good grades, and some prayed for good weather. The red silk covered the branches. When it rained, there was no shelter outside. The hanging prayer strips were wet and stuck to the branches as if they were covered with a layer of red silk. The young man holding the umbrella stopped. A piece of red cloth fell on the ground. There was a yellow tassel on it. Probably the rain was too heavy and the red silk was blown down. Xiao Ju paused and bent down to pick up the red silk. Each piece of red silk was written with the wish of the person who hung it. He looked down. The one on the left was wet from the rain. The ink was so thick that he could not see its original appearance. The one on the right was still clear. The words were crooked, like the scribbles of a 3-year-old child. The word look was written on it. Look? Look at what? It was strange. He was tall. He tied the strange red silk back to the tree. He deliberately found a place where the leaves were the most luxuriant. This way, it would not be soaked easily by the rain. After doing all this, he put the umbrella aside again. The sachet on his waist was exposed because of his movements. He was stunned. The sachet was very old. It was a dark green bag with a black python embroidered on it with gold thread. It was majestic, flexible, and exquisite. However, too much time had passed. The stitches were worn out, and the python pattern was not as vivid as before. The sachet was empty, as if there was nothing inside. He stroked the sachet with his fingertips. Something sank in his eyes. The youths in the Xianchang gymnasium all knew that Xiao Zhu had a sachet with him since he was young. The more mischievous ones like Lin Shuanghe had always been curious about what kind of treasure was inside. Later, when he had the opportunity to open it, he found that it was a bag full of osmanthus candy. At that time, second young Master Xiao was ridiculed. He liked to eat sweet things so much that he even carried them with him to school. Little did he know that this was made for him by Madame Xiao when she was alive. After Madame Xiao died, he still carried this sachet. However, there was no longer any candy inside. There was only one old, blackened, and inedible osmanthus candy. Xiao Zhu left the mountain at the age of 15 and entered the Xianchang gymnasium. He had learned everything he needed to learn in the early years of the mountain. Therefore, he only needed to see it once to remember the lessons taught by his teacher. He slept in between classes all day long. Often, he easily got first place. His teacher liked him, and his classmates envied him. In the eyes of outsiders, it was unknown how much good karma he had accumulated in his previous life to be able to reincarnate like this. However, Xiao Zhongwu was extremely strict with him. He was born lazy. Originally, when he was on the mountain, other than his teacher, there was no one to discipline him. Xiao Zhongwu also could not see him. After he left the mountain, his classmates often invited him to the banquet today and the pear garden tomorrow. They were all 14 or 15 years old youths, so there was no reason for him not to go. Although most of the time, he just sat lazily at the side and watched, or simply slept. However, in Xiao Zhongwu's eyes, he felt that this child was willing to degenerate and idle around. Xiao Zhongwu reprimanded him and used the family law to confiscate his monthly allowance. He punished him to copy books and practice martial arts. He did everything he was told. However, as a youth, arrogance and unruliness were engraved in his bones. How could he really accept it? The more he calmly accepted his punishment, the angrier Xiao Zhongwu became. Later on, he quarreled with Xiao Zhongwu. Xiao Zhu raised his eyebrows. What you wanted me to do, I did it. Since you only want to see the results are already out. Father, what are you feeling awkward about? The corner of the youth's mouth curved into a mocking smile. In an instant, Xiao Zhongwu's hand that was holding the whip stopped. Xiao Zhu chuckled and turned to leave. That was the last time he saw Xiao Zhongwu alive. The next day, Xiao Zhongwu led the troops to the southern barbarians. Not long after, he died in the Battle of Mingshui. When the news of the coffin being transported back to the capital, Madame Xiao was in the kitchen making osmanthus candy for Xiao Zhu. When she heard the news, a plate of osmanthus candy was knocked over and fell to the ground, covered in dust. The trusted aide who was lucky enough to survive knelt in front of Madame Xiao and cried. We originally planned to go to Mingshui 2 days earlier, but the general said that Mingshui is rich in ironware. He wanted to make a sword for second young master. Before leaving, he argued with second young master and hurt second young master's feelings. He hoped that this sword would let second young master understand his painstaking efforts. I didn't expect. Madame Zhao's heart-wrenching cries could be heard in the house. She rushed forward and hit Xiao Zhu. She cried and scolded. Why are you angry with him? Why? If you weren't angry with him, he wouldn't have stayed in Mingshui. He wouldn't have been ambushed, and he wouldn't have died. He endured this terrible accusation and let the woman's soft fist fall on his body. He didn't say a word. How could it be? His father, that resolute and strict man, didn't show any mercy when he waved the whip. How could a man who left his child in a strange mountain and didn't come back once a year die? He was cold and ruthless, righteous. How could he die? The terrible accusation continued. It's you who killed him. It's you who killed your father. He couldn't bear it and pushed his mother away. I didn't. It's not me. The woman was pushed away by him and looked at him blankly. Unable to bear her desperate look, Xiao Ju turned and ran out. He didn't know where he should go, nor did he know who he should talk to. It had only been a year since he went down the mountain and returned to Shuajing. In a year, he didn't even know everyone in Xiao Mansion. He didn't even learn how to get along with his family. It was already like this. When people are in extreme pain, they don't cry. He didn't feel the pain now, he was just confused. It was as if he had just heard an impossible joke and did not know how to react. He just felt that his steps were heavy and he didn't dare to go forward. He couldn't face his mother's desperate and mournful eyes. Many years later, Xiao Ju would think that if he hadn't been so timid and went back to the house, everything that happened later wouldn't have happened. But there were no ifs. When he went back, it was already nighttime. Xiao Jing and Bai Rongwei had already come back. Their eyes were red and swollen, as if they had cried. Xiao Jing, who was always weak and polite, rushed up and punched him. She grabbed his collar and shouted with red eyes, "Where did you go? Why weren't you in the mansion? Why weren't you with Mother?" He suddenly felt a wave of disgust and self-mockery. He pulled the corner of his mouth. "You and I are both sons. Why don't you ask yourself?" "You? Why, Jean?" Bai Rongwei sobbed. "Mother is gone." His smile froze. "Mother is gone." Xiao Jing let go and took 2 steps back. She covered her face and sobbed. Madame Zhao's life was as weak as a flower that had never experienced wind and rain. When Xiao Zhongwu was alive, she was dissatisfied with him and quarreled with him every few days. They were like a resentful couple. Xiao Zhongwu died, and the flower withered. Without any nutrients, it followed him. She left so decisively that she didn't even think about what her 2 sons would do if they stayed in Shuajing. Xiao family. The moment she lost Xiao Zhongwu, her life no longer had any meaning. So she used a piece of white silk to end her life. Before she died, the last words she said to Xiao Ju were, "You killed him. You killed your father." These words would become an eternal nightmare for Xiao Ju. Years later, he would often wake up in the middle of the night, unable to sleep. He would never be able to get rid of it. Xiao Zhongwu and Madame Xiao were buried together. A few days ago, in preparation for the Mid-Autumn Festival, the lanterns and canvases were removed and replaced with white lanterns. Xiao Zhongwu's death brought more than just a blow to the Xiao family. Xiao Jing had suffered many open and covert attacks in the imperial court, so Xiao Ju had to bear the same burden behind his back. The Nanfu soldiers, the Xiao family, and the unwarranted blame for the Battle of Mingshui. He still didn't shed a single tear. He did things numbly and made arrangements. The time he could sleep was getting shorter and shorter. The days he returned to the Fu were getting later and later. That night, Xiao Ju returned to the Fu late. After Xiao Zhongwu's death, most of the servants in the Fu were dismissed. Other than his personal bodyguards, he didn't need any servants. He felt hungry and realized that he hadn't eaten for a whole day. It was too late. There was no need to trouble Bai Rongwei. Xiao Ju went to the kitchen to see if there was any leftover food. The stove was cold, and there wasn't much food in the kitchen. Everyone was busy these days and didn't have the heart to eat. He found 2 steamed buns and a bowl of pickled vegetables. The light was so weak that it looked like it was going to go out. There were no stools in the kitchen. The youth was very tired. He found a corner by the wall and sat down. Suddenly, he saw an osmanthus candy at the end of the long table in the corner of the wall. When the news of Xiao Zhongwu's death came, Madame Xiao was making osmanthus candy for Xiao Ju. When she heard the news, the plate of osmanthus candy was knocked over. Later, the servants cleaned it up and there was nothing left. There was one that had slipped through the net. It was lying quietly in the corner, covered in dust. He crawled over, and carefully picked up the osmanthus candy. He brushed the dust off it. The candy smelled faintly of osmanthus. It was as sweet as always. Madame Xiao always made osmanthus candy very sweet. It was so sweet that it hurt people. He didn't eat sweet things. But this was the last piece of candy he got in the human world. There was still candy paper left in the sachet. He wrapped the candy and put it back in the sachet. He picked up the bowl and the steam bun. Second young master Xiao had always been noble. He was particular about cleanliness. But now, he didn't care about his manners and sat down to eat. He hadn't changed his clothes for 2 days. His stomach hadn't eaten a single grain of rice. He no longer looked as beautiful and charming as he did in the past. The youth leaned against the wall and sat with his head raised. He slowly chewed on the steam bun. As he ate, he laughed at himself. There seemed to be a bright light in his eyes, like the embers of the stars in the long night. It disappeared quickly. Time flew, leaving no trace. The past seemed to be a memory from his previous life. Those complicated emotions intertwined and finally turned into a nonchalant smile. It wasn't a hurdle that couldn't be crossed. He looked at the sachet in his hand in a daze. He didn't know what to think. After a while, he let go and continued to walk forward. Young master, Fei Nu came from behind. He took the umbrella and held it for Xiao Ju. He asked, "Are we going back to the temple now?" "Let's go." Xiao Ju said, "Let's get some fresh air." The last trace of light disappeared. Mount Lianxue was completely dark. Thick fog filled the air. It was like an illusion in the mountains. Almost no one would leave on a night like this. The rain fell along the umbrella. It wasn't heavy, but it was dense. It was like a layer of cold gauze covering the mountains. "I don't know when this rain will stop," Fei Nu murmured. Most of the mid-autumn nights were sunny. It was rare to see a night like this. Xiao Ju looked up. The night was dark, and he couldn't see the end. He said, "There is no moon tonight. Without the moon, people wouldn't be round." The mountain forest road was muddy. Other than the sound of the rain, nothing could be heard. The further they walked, the more lush the trees were. They couldn't see clearly. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound in front of them. Fei Nu paused and reminded, "Young master." Xiao Ju shook his head, indicating that he had heard it. It was so late and it was raining. Who would be here? Fei Nu poked the lantern in his hand forward. The rain was heavy. There was a figure standing under a tree. At first, he could only see a blurry shadow. It was probably a woman. He didn't know what she was doing. He took 2 steps forward and looked again. He saw that the woman was standing on a rock. Her hands were tugging at something long, and she was pulling it down. It was tied to the tree. It was a piece of white silk. This woman was seeking death. Chapter 126. Tian had never thought that there would be such a difficult time in life. It was so difficult that she couldn't even take a step forward. She hadn't seen the moon in a long time. Since she lost her sight, she had been living in a daze. Su Zhiheng had comforted her, saying that he would always be by her side. Tian had also smiled and agreed. However, no matter how calm she appeared, her heart was still at a loss and fearful. She had faced many difficulties in her life. Most of the time, she had stood up with a strong will and told herself that everything would be fine after she took this step. Unconsciously, when she looked back, she had already taken many steps. This was the only step she couldn't take, and she didn't know how to take it. Tian was no longer General Fei Hong. She had become young Mistress Su, and she was just an ordinary woman. An ordinary woman suddenly lost her sight. Although her husband still treated her well, it was like a flower in the water, with a kind of illusory perfunctory. She couldn't feel it. On Chinese Valentine's Day, she sat in the Fu until late at night, but Su Zhiheng didn't return. She originally thought that it was because of some matters at court. She only found out the next day that Su Zhiheng had accompanied He Wanru to the temple fair. She groped her way to the window in the room and sat down, quietly listening to the servant girls outside chatting. Yesterday, Master and Madam quarreled. They quarreled so much that even Master knew. Master is in a bad mood, but we servants are unlucky. Isn't it all because of that person in the East Courtyard? If you ask me, I think Master is too soft-hearted. That person in the east courtyard is now blind. How can our young mistress be blind? It'll be a joke. Madame even canceled the banquet outside these days because she didn't want others to ask. A servant girl couldn't stand it and spoke up for her. Young mistress wasn't born blind. She's already very pitiful for suddenly becoming like this. Pitiful? What's so pitiful about her? Even if she's blind, she can stay in the foo and be served every day. At least she doesn't lack food and clothing. What's the difference between her and that pet? The pitiful one is Master. At such a young age, he has to be tied up with this blind person for the rest of his life. Our Master is talented and unparalleled. What kind of woman can he find? Why does he have to find someone like this? Yes, I'm the pitiful one. Words like these were like sharp hooks that drilled into her heart, making her bleed profusely. That night, she sat in her room and waited for Su Jiheng to come back. She said to him, "Let's divorce." Su Jiheng was startled and asked warmly, "Why do you say that? Or you can divorce me." She didn't like to beat around the bush, so she spoke the truth. "Now that I can't see, there's no need for me to burden you. You and I are husband and wife." Su Jiheng held her hand and said, "Don't talk about this anymore. Rest early." He changed the subject, but did not deny He Yan's claim of being a burden. He Yan's heart sank. Every day after that, she lived a life of being provided with clothes and food, and often heard the servants in the residence secretly ridiculing her. Madame Su's words were full of sarcasm, implying that He Yan was a burden to the Su family. Su Jiheng still treated her gently, but other than that, there was nothing else. He Yan felt very tired. She seemed to be walking on a dark road in the middle of the night, with no passers-by. She couldn't see the light in front of her, and there was no place to retreat behind her. She didn't know when she would reach the end and end this torturous life. A few days before the Mid-Autumn Festival, she said to Su Jiheng, "I know Yuhua Temple on Mount Lianshan. There's an immortal tree in the temple that's very spiritual. During the Mid-Autumn Festival, can we go to the mountains? I want to hang silk on the tree and make a wish. Maybe my eyes can be cured." Since she lost her sight, she almost never asked for anything from Su Jiheng. Su Jiheng was stunned for a moment, but he finally agreed. He said, "Okay." Perhaps it was because when one was unlucky, even drinking cold water would get stuck in one's teeth. In previous years, the Mid-Autumn Festival was sunny, but this year it rained for days. When the carriage reached the mountain, the sky was unbelievably gloomy. It was impossible to go down the mountain that afternoon. Perhaps they would have to stay on the mountain for one more night. Su Jiheng helped her to the temple. A monk stuffed a piece of red silk into her hand and told her the location of the immortal tree behind the temple. He stroked the red silk and thanked the monk. The monk clasped his hands and said kindly, "If you suffer 100,000 calamities, your work will not perish. When the time comes, karma will reap what you sow." She didn't understand Buddhist scriptures. She wanted to ask again, but the monk had already walked far away. It was raining. Su Jiheng accompanied He Yan to the side of the immortal tree. There were stone tables and stone stools beside the immortal tree for the pilgrims who usually came to hang the red silk to write. Su Jiheng laid out the red silk for her and stuffed a brush into her hand. He said, "Write." He Yan wrote slowly based on her feelings. "I hope I can still see the moon." He didn't need to think to know that the handwriting must be crooked and terrible. After she finished writing, she carefully handed the red silk to Su Jiheng. Su Jiheng helped her hang the immortal tree. He Yan couldn't see anything, so she didn't see it. Her husband stood up and casually hung the red silk on a branch by his elbow. He didn't even bother to tie the red silk properly and just hung it casually. There was no shelter on the tree. After a short while, the red silk was soaked by the rain. The handwriting on it quickly became a blurry ink stain. It was difficult to see what was written. "Let's go." Su Jiheng came over and helped He Yan leave. Boom! A small clap of thunder resounded. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew, causing the tree branches to rustle. The red silk that was not tied properly was blown off by the wind. It smashed into the puddles of water, splashing mud all over. Hien seemed to feel something and asked worriedly, "The wind is so strong. Won't it blow the silk away?" "How could it?" Su Jihing smiled and comforted her. "It's tied very tightly." After he said that, he stepped over the red silk as if he didn't see it. The rain showed no signs of stopping. They had no choice but to stay in the mountains for the night. Su Jihing went to find the masters of Yuhua Temple to discuss the sutras. It was already evening. Hien sat quietly in the room with the lights on. At this time, she should have gone to bed and rested. As a blind person, there was nothing she could do except sleep and eat. But tonight, the rain was sparse and she couldn't sleep. She didn't know what time it was. She called the maids' names twice, but no one answered. She leaned against the wall and slowly walked out, intending to call someone. When she reached the door, she heard two maids talking. "I think I heard young mistress calling for someone." "Really? Don't worry about it. It's so late. What's the point of calling for someone? You're already a blind person, yet you're still making trouble. Do you really think you're young mistress?" Hien was startled when she heard this. These two maids weren't her personal maids. They were Su Jihing's servants. Usually, they were gentle and gentle. Because of her relationship with Su Jihing, they had always treated her with respect. She didn't know that they were talking about her like this in private. If she didn't want to go up the mountain today, we wouldn't have to spend the Mid-Autumn Festival here. It's still raining outside. It's really unlucky. Sir is just too kind. He's not angry even with such a burden. It's not like you don't know Sir's temperament. On the surface, he's not angry, but in his heart, he's always unhappy. Our Su family has become a joke in the capital. Sir has always been proud and arrogant. Thinking about it, his heart must be very uncomfortable. If I were her, I'd hang myself with a rope so that I won't be a burden to others. Sure, you can't say such nonsense. The maids who spoke disagreed. You're like an animal. Every day, you wait for someone to feed you. After eating, you sleep. You're always being served. You can't leave the residence, and you can't see anyone. Life is boring. It's okay for 1 or 2 years, but if you have to live like this for the rest of your life, what's the point of living? It's better to die early and be free. Perhaps you'll be able to see the rest of your life if you're reincarnated. Stop talking. There's hot water outside. Let's go get some hot water first. The sound of footsteps gradually faded away. Hien slowly slid down to sit with her back to the door. Yes, 1 or 2 years was fine, but if she had to live like this for the rest of her life, what was the point of living? The maids in the master's room didn't dare to trample on whoever the master thought highly of. Since these two people could talk about her as if nothing had happened, it was clear that Su Jihing wasn't as free of regrets in the room as he was in front of her. However, in this world, how many people could be free of regrets? Hien didn't know if the lights in the room were on or not. To her, it was all the same. All of a sudden, he felt like he had lost all hope. When she was young, she practiced martial arts. When she was young, she went to school. Later on, she went to the battlefield and fought for military merits. She had been working for others for the rest of her life. With great difficulty, she finally took off her mask. She thought that she could start all over again, but at this time, she fell into darkness again. Moreover, she would be trapped in a 4-corner house for the rest of her life. She had to be followed every step she took. A person's despair wasn't accumulated overnight. Little by little, the little things in daily life nibbled away at his passion. His passion was slowly being exhausted. Disappointment and heaviness weighed down on him, and the last straw fell gently. With a splash, hope sank to the bottom of the water. Despair covered the sky and covered the earth. She groped around and slowly stood up. There was a belt left over from her clothes in the room. She randomly grabbed her outer garment and put it on. She picked up the bamboo pole she used when she was blind and shakily went out the door. There were few people in the mountain temple. Because it was dark and raining outside, the monks had already entered the temple hall. She walked around randomly and unexpectedly didn't bump into anyone. Fortunately, when she was young, she had cultivated the habit of memorizing the road. She still remembered that when she went up the mountain, Su Jiheng told her that there was a dense forest near the mountain stream not far from the temple. The waterfall was like pearls and jade falling on a plate. It was magnificent and strangely beautiful. There were mountains, water, and trees. It was pretty good. Unfortunately, it was raining tonight and there was no moon, which she liked. It was inconvenient for a blind person to go out, especially on a muddy mountain road. She didn't know how many times she fell and how many times she was tripped by Shirtu. She only felt that her clothes were wet from head to toe and her hair was messy. In the end, she was gasping for breath and didn't know where she was. She fell in front of a tree and hit her head on the trunk. Ian reached out and groped around. This tree was very big. It should be an old tree. She probably couldn't find a dense forest with a waterfall. Here was also fine. She had never cared much about external objects. It took her a long time to move to a piece of Shirtu. Yin was exhausted. He sat down on the Shirtu. The rain was a little lighter, and it hit her body densely. The young woman looked up at the sky, as if she could see the moon. Only the rain slid down her cheeks. She wiped the water off her face. Don't be a boat on the river. Don't be a moon on the river. The boat carries people and leaves. The moon shines on people and leaves. She didn't have anything to miss about this world. The only thing she missed was that there was no moon tonight. Yin slowly stood up and touched the cloth beside her. The cloth was tied tightly. She pulled it down. It was very stable. It shouldn't break. She kicked the Shirtu away. The cloth that was twisted into a rope broke with a sound. Yin was caught off guard and fell to the ground. The mud on the ground splashed on her. She was stunned for a moment. Suddenly, she understood that the cloth was broken. It was broken? For a moment, she couldn't suppress the inexplicable grievance and sorrow in her heart. She choked for a moment, then sobbed softly. Then, she lay on the ground and cried loudly. Yin rarely shed tears. As a general, shedding tears would affect morale. On the battlefield, she always had to maintain her confident and energetic appearance, as if nothing could affect her judgment. When she was no longer a general, she would feel that she was being unreasonable if she wanted to cry again. But there were always times when people were weak. When she was neglected, she could endure it. When she was blind, she could endure it. When she heard the taunts of the maidservants, she could endure it. When her mother-in-law hinted that she would be a burden, she could endure it. But if she couldn't even kill herself, and even the cloth was about to break, she couldn't endure it. Her tears were hot. Big drops of tears flowed down her cheeks and fell into the mud on her body. She couldn't tell which was the rain and which was the tears. She cried heartbreakingly. Suddenly, she heard a strange voice. It was a man's voice. In the wind and rain, his voice was deep and pleasant. With a hint of impatience, he asked, "Why are you crying?" Yan's crying stopped abruptly. Xiaoju looked at the woman in front of her. This was a woman who was seeking death. She was in a sorry state from head to toe. She was wearing a white inner robe, but she was wearing a red outer robe. Even the belt of the outer robe was tied incorrectly. Perhaps she had fallen many times on the road, but the robe had several holes. Her face was also extremely dirty. She looked like a cat with mud everywhere. Xiaoju loved cleanliness. She felt that this scene was very offensive. Finally, she couldn't help but take out a white handkerchief and hand it over. The woman didn't take it. She made a defensive posture and asked, "Who are you?" He was surprised for a moment. He noticed that the other party's eyes were wandering. After thinking for a moment, he put away the handkerchief and squatted down to ask, "You can't see?" The woman was stunned for a moment. She replied fiercely, "Yes, I'm blind." She said it with arrogance. Fei Nu stood behind him and was about to step forward. Xiaoju gently shook his head at him. He unclenched her fists vigilantly. She just wanted to quietly hang herself. Now, the cloth was broken and a stranger saw her embarrassing situation. Why did the heavens always treat her so unexpectedly? Xiaoju looked at her indifferently and bent down to pick up the throwing knife on the ground. Just now, he had used this knife to break the cloth on the tree. "What do you want?" Ian asked. Xiaoju replied, "I'm just passing by." He really wasn't a good person who liked to meddle in other people's business. He had already done his best to go to this extent. Xiao Ju stood up and turned to leave. After a few steps, Fei Nu came closer and whispered, "Today, Yuhua Temple only has Hanlin scholar Su Zhiheng and his wife. This woman should be He Yin, young mistress Su, who was blind a few days ago." He Yin? He raised his eyebrows. He Rufei's younger sister? Xiao Ju turned around to look. The woman had already found the broken piece of cloth. The cloth was not long, but it could still be used after it was broken into two. First, she used half of the cloth to draw a few lines around her neck. After confirming that it could still be used, she shakily tied a knot with the cloth. She actually wanted to hang herself again. Xiao Ju was a little incredulous and wanted to laugh. This kind of stubbornness bordering on stupidity was very similar to her cousin. Most people seek death out of a moment of anger. They hang themselves and jump off a cliff. When the moment comes, most people will regret it, but it's too late. Since this woman had already tasted death, she wouldn't seek death again. He didn't expect her to be so stubborn. Even if the rope was broken, she still wanted to continue. He shouldn't have cared. No one could stop a person who was determined to die. But Xiao Ju suddenly remembered many years ago. On a mid-autumn night like this, a young man anxiously returned home, only to find his mother's cold corpse. The scene in front of him seemed to overlap with the past. For a moment, he couldn't tell which night it was. Fei Nu was behind him, looking at him in confusion. Xiao Ju took a deep breath and finally compromised. He walked to the woman's side and asked, "Why do you want to die?" Ian was shocked. She clearly heard the other party's footsteps leaving. Why did she suddenly turn back? She had been forced to compromise her whole life and was manipulated by others. Now that she was at her end, she didn't want to think about others. This person's meddling in other people's business made her unhappy, so she vented all her anger on him. She almost shouted back, "It's none of your business." The young man grabbed her arm and pulled her up from the ground. Ian was shocked. She struggled for a bit, but she was already stumbling and didn't have any strength left. She couldn't see, so she was dragged along. After taking 2 steps, she was thrown down and sat on the ground. The ground was soft. It was a patch of grass. That person seemed to be standing beside her. He bent over and said in a cold voice, "Why do you want to die?" Ian was also angry. She shouted, "I said it's none of your business. There's no moon today, so I want to die. The mountain road is too slippery, so I want to die. Even the rope I tied will break, so I want to die. I met a meddlesome person like you here, so I want to die. Is that enough?" She shouted fiercely, but tears rolled down her cheeks. She was originally an aggressive tiger, but now she looked more like a wet wild cat with nowhere to go. Fei Nu stood nervously behind Xiao Ju. It was rare for second young Master Xiao to be patient enough to meddle in other people's business. This woman was also so fierce. It was even rarer. After He Yin shouted, she suddenly felt something wipe her face. It was soft and dense like the clouds in spring. Indifferent, with a trace of imperceptible warmth, a comforting voice sounded. "If you really want to be strong, so what if you're blind? Even if you're blind, you can be the most different one among the blind." Her anger came to an abrupt end. All of his wretched and weak state had nowhere to hide, completely exposed in front of everyone. "It's nothing. Although I can't see, I can still hear. You're with me, so it's okay." She smiled and said to Su Zhiheng, "How could it be okay? How could it be okay?" At night, she used her fingers to trace her eyes over and over again, praying for God's mercy so that she could see again the next day. Those nights where she tossed and turned, those nights where she gritted her teeth and told herself it was okay, those nights where she pretended as if nothing had happened. They didn't know. They didn't understand anything. But a stranger passing by understood. She couldn't cry, couldn't be seen as weak, couldn't complain, couldn't lose her temper. It had been too long, so long that these emotions were like silkworms spinning silk, wrapping her layer by layer into a strong cocoon. She sat alone in the cocoon, isolated from the outside world. He in outside the cocoon was gentle, optimistic, and always thinking of others with a smile. He in inside the cocoon was painful, wronged, and suppressed his cries for help. For so many years, from He Rufei to He Yin, she had never taken off her mask. Until tonight, a stranger passing by saw through everything. He took off her mask and saw her tears. All her defenses and vigilance were instantly deflated. She slowly lowered her head, and her tears fell even bigger. He originally thought that after saying this sentence, He Yin would stop crying, but he didn't expect her to cry even louder. The rain showed no signs of stopping, and the grass below was already wet. Xiao Ju hooked his finger, and Fei Nu stepped forward. He took the umbrella in Fei Nu's hand and held it over He Yan's head. He Yan still didn't stop crying. He had never seen such a fierce, bad-tempered woman who could cry so much. It was hard to imagine that He Rufei, who was so silly and happy, would have such a different sister. Xiao Ju was dumbfounded by her crying. He couldn't bear it anymore and finally said, "Don't cry." "Why can't I cry?" She was like an ignorant wild cat, showing her claws to the person who fed her. Her voice was already hoarse, but she still wanted to argue. "Not only will I cry, I will also seek death. I'm already like this. What's the point of living?" Sob, 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 sob. Xiao Ju. He had never coaxed a woman before, and this was the result of his first attempt? Why was she so stubborn? "What do I have to do to make you stop crying?" He suppressed his anger, "So that you won't continue to hang yourself." He Yin sobbed and sobbed. Now that she was here, she no longer had any thoughts of seeking death. Sometimes people were just stuck at a juncture. If it was over, it was over. If it couldn't be over, it couldn't be over. This passerby appeared out of nowhere, and his words were not very warm, but she didn't want to die. She said, "If you can give me a piece of candy now, I won't seek death." When she was young, she liked to eat sweet things. However, after she was 5 years old, Madam, he kept a very strict watch on her. She was afraid that she would be exposed, so she had to get rid of her sweet habit. Later, she joined the army. There were no sweet candies in the army, only coarse dried biscuits. After she got married, He Yin saw that He Wanru was sick. Su Zhiheng went to visit her and specially brought her a small box of candied plums. When He Wanru took a sip of medicine, Su Zhiheng stuffed a piece of candied plum into her mouth. He Yin saw this when he passed by the window. For a moment, jealousy rose in his heart. He didn't know if he was envious that Su Zhiheng was so good to He Wanru, or that He Wanru could get a lot of sweetness after suffering a little. He Yin had never been willful, but tonight he didn't know why, but he seemed to want to show his willfulness to the extreme in front of this stranger. The young man was slightly startled. He turned his head to look at the person beside him. The woman's face was carelessly wiped a few times with a handkerchief. Her cheeks were still muddy. Her eyes were slightly red and swollen, but they were surprisingly bright. Her stubborn expression was familiar. It was very similar to a clumsy teenager. He was silent for a moment. His slender fingertips reached for the sachet at his waist. Fei Nu was shocked. He held the dark blue sachet in his hand. He pinched the bottom of the sachet and poured out a piece of osmanthus candy wrapped in candy paper. It had been too long. The candy paper and the candy had been stuck together. It was so dark that it was impossible to see its original appearance. After Madame Xiao died, Xiao Ju carried the last piece of osmanthus candy with him. Over the years, this candy had accompanied him through many difficult times. When he couldn't hold on anymore, he looked at this candy. It seemed that he could taste a little sweetness in the world. This was the only sweetness in his life. Now he was going to give it to a woman who couldn't stop crying and wanted to die. He thought that he didn't need candy in his life. So be it. He Yin felt something stuffed into her hand. She subconsciously clenched it and wanted to peel it off. "You can't eat it." A man's voice sounded beside her. "What?" she said. "Are you lying to me? You randomly found a piece of shirt too and told me that it's candy?" He Yin heard the other person's voice. There was a hint of disappointment in his voice. "This is the last piece of candy left in the world. It's very sweet, but you can't eat it." "Are you crazy?" He Yin never knew that she was such a greedy person. She thought that this person must have a good temper and a soft heart to tolerate her nonsense again and again. She said, "It's very sweet, but you can't eat it. There's only one in the world. Is this a gift from His Majesty? She didn't see that the handsome young man sitting beside her lowered his head and smiled indifferently. He said, "It's more precious than a gift from His Majesty." Ian quickly tore off the candy paper and stuffed it in her mouth when the other person wasn't paying attention. "You!" He was stunned. "I've already eaten it. I swallowed it." Ian acted shamelessly. The other person didn't answer. This was the first piece of candy she had received in her life. The taste of the candy was very strange. It was mixed with her tears. It was so bitter. She thought, so be it. As the rain stopped, she didn't feel the rain falling on her body. She reached out and scratched her body as she asked the person beside her. The young man beside her had been kneeling on one knee, holding an umbrella for her. The umbrella was not big. More than half of his body was wet. The side of his face was well-defined, and his eyelashes were covered with fine droplets of water. His eyes were enshrouded with a faint layer of gentleness. It stopped. "Is there a moon in the sky?" The sky was dark, and there was not a single star. "Where did the moon come from?" He answered, "Yes." "What is it like outside?" "The bright moon is like frost. The wind is like water, and the scenery is endless." Ian smiled for the first time that night. "It's so nice." She heard the person beside her ask, "Don't you want to die?" "I don't want to." "If you don't want to die, then go home," he said, and pulled Ian up. Ian subconsciously wanted to grab his hand, but that slender hand with distinct joints had already let go very quickly. Xiao Ju walked in front of Fei Nu and whispered, "Send him to sister-in-law's room and let her send him back. I'm a man, so it's inconvenient for me to appear." Fei Nu complied. When he was about to leave, he suddenly added, "Warn Su Zhiheng. Tell him not to go too far." This meant that he was going to stand up for Yin. Fei Nu came over to support Yin. Yin seemed to feel that the other person was about to leave. She reached out in the person's direction and said, "Thank you. Who are you?" He didn't speak. Yin only had time to grab the corner of a sleeve. It slipped from her hand. It was cold and soft, like the moonlight. Even though she couldn't see anything, she vaguely saw light. It was warm and cold, blazing and bright. It didn't blame her at all. It was patient and tolerant. It saw through all her secrets and wrapped her up gently. In the end, she didn't know who the other person was. That was the worst mid-autumn festival that Yin had ever experienced. She was covered in mud. Her hair was unkempt, and her face was dirty. She was only a hair's breadth away from despair. Fortunately, the moon was always by her side. There was no moon that night, but the moonlight was really beautiful. The thin and soft light had warmed her for many years. Chapter 127. Above the river, the moonlight was thousands of miles away, and it was cold enough to penetrate one's clothes. White light leaked through the gaps between the branches, like snow that had not yet melted. Yin turned her head and looked at the person opposite her. The young man's eyes were like autumn water, moving even without adding color. His side profile was angular, heroic, and lazy. The faint smile on his lips instantly made her return to that night in the mountain temple. "It was you." Her mind was a little muddled, and she was at a loss. In the end, she did not know who the other party was. She only remembered that she was sent to a room in the mountain temple, and a woman with a gentle voice took care of her, cleaned her up, and sent her back to Su Zhiheng. Su Zhiheng asked her what was going on, and Yin only said that she wanted to go out for a walk and accidentally lost her way. He did not say much. As for the woman who sent her back, Su Zhiheng did not mention her again. Therefore, she did not know who the strange man she met was. But the other party said, "If you really want to be strong, so what if you were blind? Even if you were blind, you could be the most different among the blind." She always remembered it in her mind, and she did not forget a single word. Later, she tried to distinguish shapes by listening to sounds, and she could live without her eyes. This process was very difficult, but every time she wanted to give up, she would think of the moon behind the Tianshan temple. The moon was very beautiful, and it would be a pity to give up like this. It was not that she did not think about everything that happened that day, but when she calmed down and thought about it, some things were not necessarily unintentional. How could she coincidentally hear the conversation between the maids at the door? How could no one in the Su family have noticed a person stumbling into the mountains? When she was sent back, Su Jihing easily believed her words and did not pursue the matter. He just wanted her to be free. She was not a snow-white kitten raised in the courtyard of a rich family, and she was not held in the arms of a madam or a young miss. She would be happy after being teased with a ball of thread, and she was docile and weak. She was a wild cat that came out of an alley at night, dirty and tenacious. Even if she was blind, she could sit on the wall and hunt. They wanted her to die, but she did not want to die. After all, in this world, someone had given her a piece of candy and taught her how to taste the sweetness of the world. Ian had always thought that the strange passerby that night might be a kind-hearted young master or a very patient young master, but he didn't expect it to be Xiaoju. How could it be him? She asked softly. Granny Su, what kind of person is she? Xiaoju smiled and lazily said, a very fierce, crybaby, bad-tempered woman. Ian also smiled, but his eyes were a little wet. She said, does young Mistress Su know that you're talking about her behind her back? She had saved the worst side of herself for that night with Xiaoju, and the most gentle side of Xiaoju's life was probably reserved for her that night. Ian did not know that his stay at that time had become the only salvation for the desperate Ian. The moon was lonely and cold, hanging in the sky, but no one knew that he had once shown the moonlight so gently on a person. She won't have a chance to know, Xiaoju said calmly, because young Mistress Su was dead. Maybe she knows. Ian lowered his head and smiled. Suddenly, he looked at the sky and sighed. The moon is so beautiful. Xiaoju supported herself with her hands and looked up, but did not look at him. Didn't you say that you wanted to drink with Chu Xylan? Didn't you bring wine? Ian said loudly, a cup of wine for the mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas. She held her hands in the air, and the moonlight fell into her hands, as if it was a cup full. She raised her hands to the sky and said, to the moon. The young man looked on coldly and sneered, crazy. The girl turned around and solemnly raised the cup in her hand to him. Here's to you too. Ian's eyes were no longer tired and gloomy. At this moment, his eyes were bright, and his smile was bright. There was even a trace of gratitude in his eyes. Gratitude? He raised his eyebrows and snorted, but did not respond to her silly gesture. Flattery. Ian looked into Xiaoju's eyes and said quietly in his heart, really, thank you very much. That night, Ian and Xiaoju sat together until very late. In the end, because it was too cold on the mountain, she and Xiaoju went down the mountain. When they got back, it was already midnight. The next day, they woke up later. After lunch, they wanted to find Chu Zhao to talk about what happened last night. But when they arrived, they found that he had already left. Are you looking for Chu Xylan? Lin Shuanghe passed by and said, this morning, Chu Xylan returned to the capital with the people from Shuajing. This morning? Ian was stunned. He didn't tell me it was this morning. They came in a hurry. Lin Shuanghe opened his fan and waved it. Brother, he meeting and parting his fate. He will return to Shuajing sooner or later. You don't have to be too forceful. Ian was confused. What was she being too forceful about? She just felt that it was a pity that she didn't even say goodbye to Chu Zhao before leaving. After all, fourth young Master Chu had been in Liangzhou with her every day to sort out the relationship between the officials in Shuajing. But since he had already left, there was no point in talking about this. Not long after Chu Zhao left, Song Taodao and Cheng Lisu also left for Shuajing. Xiaoju arranged for them to be escorted back to the capital. Before the little girl left, she pulled on Yan's clothes with tears in her eyes. Brother, you must come back to see me. See you for what? You're a girl. My big brother is a man. How can he come to see you? Cheng Lisu pulled her away and replaced her with herself. She laughed and said to Yin, Big brother, look at me. Come to our residence as a guest. I'll treat you to all the restaurants in Shuajing. Song Taodao. Cheng Lisu. I know. When we get back, we'll cancel the engagement. Cheng Lisu picked her ear and muttered, Bitch, Only a ghost will want to marry you. With the two children playing around, it seemed like they wouldn't be lonely on the road. He sent them to the carriage. For a moment, he felt a bit disappointed. Usually, he felt that they were naughty and noisy. But when it was time to leave, he felt very reluctant. When she was Hirufe, because of her identity, she couldn't get too close to her brothers and sisters in the residence. Chung Lisu and Song Taodao were like siblings in an ordinary family, just like He Yunxing. In a way, they made up for the fantasy she had about her family. Wang Ba and Zhang Jiao walked over. Zhang Jiao said, "Brother He." After the misunderstanding was cleared, Zhang Jiao finally believed that He Yin didn't steal his wife. His attitude slightly improved. He said, "My family sent some things over. I picked some food and necessities. You can go get them for me later." Wang Ba said sourly, "The young master of the martial arts school is so good. He's already here to join the army, but people still send him things." "Aren't you the leader of the mountain bandits?" He Yin asked curiously. "Why didn't your subordinates send you anything?" "No money. Poor. Can't the bandits' nest be disbanded?" Wang Ba became angry. "Why are you asking me? You didn't receive anything either." "I'm just asking. Don't get angry." He Yin thought, how could she be the same as Wang Ba? She was now living in anonymity. If the He family still sent her things, did they want her to die faster? Or was it because the government couldn't write a warrant for her arrest? "But, Brother Jiang, why did your family suddenly send you things?" He Yin asked. Zhang Jiao said helplessly, "Brother He, did you forget that it's going to be the New Year soon?" "The New Year?" He Yin was startled. She had been living too comfortably these days. She actually almost forgot that it was going to be the New Year in a few days. The New Year was coming. It belonged to He Yin. The New Year. She suddenly became happy. Zhang Jiao and Wang Ba were both startled. Wang Ba asked suspiciously, "Why are you so happy? Did Military Governor Xiao give you something good behind our backs again?" He Yin answered seriously, "That's right. Good wine, good food, good future. Are you envious? Are you jealous?" After she finished speaking, she turned around and left. Wang Ba was stunned for a moment. He chased after her and said, "Hey, tell me clearly. What did he give you? Don't run." The Liang province guards had a pretty good new year. Xiao Ju, as the commander, treated all the new recruits equally. Regardless of whether it was the Southern Prefecture soldiers or the Liang province guards, they all had a full New Year's Eve dinner. There were dishes, meat, and good wine. It was very lively. The joy even diluted the bitter cold at the border. But this New Year's passed and training continued. After the end of the year, Hian's injuries were almost healed. She also trained with them. Even though she wanted to enter the Nine Flags Battalion, the amount of daily training for the Southern Prefecture soldiers wasn't something Hian, who had just recovered from a serious illness, could afford. As such, she could only suffer alongside the Liang province guards. The days passed peacefully until one day. Fei Nu received a letter from Lu County. In the room, Fei Nu was talking to Xiao Ju. "Young master, Wanning said that if the commander-in-chief is looking for a suitable person to travel with, it would be best to set off in the next few days. Jiang is not close to Liang province. If we set off now, it would be spring by the time we arrive. We should be able to make it in time for Princess Mengji's birthday. Qianqi might appear on that day." Xiao Ju looked up. "Xiao Huanqing? This child is the nephew of Princess Jiang's general, Cui Yuji," Fei Nu said. "When he was young, he was taken away by the Cui family's enemies. Later, he was luckily rescued. He was stranded in the Central Plains and was adopted by a rich merchant. The rich merchant had no children, so Xiao Huanqing inherited his wealth. He married his wife last year, but for some reason, Cui Yuji found her whereabouts. Cui Yuji has no other family members, so he wrote a letter to invite him to attend Princess Mingji's birthday banquet. However, Xiao Huanqing is very timid. Before he reached Jiang, he was robbed by bandits when he passed by Lu County. He was slightly injured. He also heard that there were many bad people on the road to Jiang, so he refused to go forward." Xiao Ju's eyes moved slightly. She smiled but did not say anything. Needless to say, The bad people were definitely Luan Ying's doing. However, after scaring Xiao Huanqing, this person did not dare to go to Jiang. Wasn't he too cowardly? The person sent by Luan Ying agreed with Cui Yuji that he would replace Xiao Huanqing to attend the banquet in Jiang. However, Xiao Huanqing would have to pay 1,000 taels of gold as a reward. Xiao Huanqing had been separated from his family for many years. Cui Yuji had not seen this nephew of his for more than 10 years, so no one knows what Xiao Huanqing looks like now. This person's identity is suitable, and the time is suitable. Luan also sent a pass and a jade tablet to prove his identity. Young master, there shouldn't be any problems. A nephew who had been separated from the vassal king's trusted aide for many years. This identity could be said to be very convenient, but you make it sound so easy, Chi-Wu could not help but say. But Luan already said that Cui Yuji invited Xiao Huanqing and his wife, as well as his newly married wife. It's not a big deal to be a governor, but where can we find a woman to pretend to be his wife? We can't say that the madam disappeared halfway. Fei Nu's face was wooden, but he also knew that Chi Wu's words made sense. The Southern Prefecture Army and the Nine Banners Battalion did not lack men. Whenever there was a need for people, there were people who were agile, smart, handsome, and strange. There were all kinds of people, but there were no women. Luan Ying was the only woman, but Luan Ying, her son, was already 12 years old. How could she be Xiao Huanqing's wife? Xiao Ju frowned. For the first time, his handsome face showed some embarrassment. You can find a death warrior with high martial arts. Fei Nu reminded. How can that be? Chi Wu refused without thinking. We haven't known each other for a long time. Who knows if they are good or bad? If they secretly harm young master, can you and I bear the responsibility? Chi Wu spoke without thinking. Fei Nu had nothing to say, so he only said, Then do you have someone in mind? Me? Chi Wu thought hard and said solemnly, Let's not talk about the Southern Prefecture Army. Even in our Shao Mansion, we don't know many girls who know martial arts. When the madam was still alive, she didn't like master to play with swords and sticks. Even the maids we took in only knew how to write poems and flowers and tend to the flowers and plants. I haven't seen many girls like this. Find a girl? Someone outside the window unhurriedly waved a folding fan and elegantly said, I know this. Why don't you ask these two uncouth men instead of me? Xiao Huaijin, aren't you recklessly wasting God's gift? Have they seen a girl before? Why don't you ask me such a difficult question? This young master will answer your question. Xiao Ju glanced at him and said indifferently, Who let him in? Chi Wu, it wasn't me. Fei Nu, it wasn't me. Do you still need to let him in? Lin Xuana felt very good about himself. Everyone in the Liang Province Guard knows that you and I have been close friends for many years. I'm also the white-robed divine hand who can bring people back to life. Of course they respect me. I can go anywhere in the Liang Province Guard unimpeded. Throw him out? Fei Nu. AI, Xiao Huaijin, what kind of dog temper is this? Lin Xuana said as he walked in through the door. He waved his hand, indicating that Fei Nu and Chi Wu should leave. Let me solve your young master's difficult illness. Fei Nu and Chi Wu left. Lin Xuanhe closed the door and windows. Xiao Ju coldly watched his actions. Lin Xuanhe sat down on the chair in front of him and asked, Looking for a girl? Xiao Ju kicked him. Lin Xuanhe jumped up. If you want to talk, then talk. Don't keep hitting me. I didn't eavesdrop on your conversation just now. I only heard half of it. What do you mean a girl with good skills? Why are you looking for a girl with good skills? A female guard? Xiao Ju stared at him and suddenly laughed. He lazily curled his lips and said unhurriedly, Looking for a wife. Lin Xuanhe? Question mark. After a while, he suddenly came back to his senses and realized what Xiao Ju meant. You gonna get married? That can't be. That's not right. You're always talking about blind marriages and mute marriages. If you're going to get married, you should find a wife yourself. Why are you asking Fei Nu and the others to find one for you, as if you're picking vegetables? Xiao Huaijin, are you talking nonsense? Xiao Ju, did I say that you're looking for a wife for me? Lin Xuanhe, you're looking for someone else. You don't even know where you are. Xiao Ju said impatiently. It's fake. Don't you know how to act? What? Lin Shuanghe stared blankly for a moment before slowly coming back to his senses. He stared at Xiao Ju for a while, until Xiao Ju revealed a displeased expression. Only then did he move closer and say, Are you going to do something like last time when you went to the Liang province guard to deal with Sun Xiangfu? Find someone to pretend to be your wife and do something? Lin Shuanghe finally got the truth out of Song Tao Tao's mouth. The little girl was no match for this kind of person. In just a few sentences, Lin Shuanghe knew what was going on. You're not that stupid. Then isn't there someone in front of you? Lin Shuanghe said without thinking. Of course you're looking for my little sister, he. Have you forgotten that my little sister, he's also a girl? And she's quite skilled. She's brave and smart, not pretentious, and very cute. If she can pretend to be your nephew, then of course she can pretend to be your wife. Xiao Ju, no. Why not? Lin Shuanghe was dissatisfied. She can call you father. Is it wrong for you to call her wife? Xiao Ju took a sip of tea and looked at him indifferently. Did you accept He Yan's money to speak for her? I'm so rich. Why would I accept money from others? But you, Lin Shuanghe leaned closer. Why are you so resistant? Xiao Huijin. Xiao Huijin. Have you forgotten that you found a fake wife? At this time, don't be picky about your real wife. Or, he stood up straight and waved his fan. Using a mysterious tone, he said, Are you afraid that you'll fall in love with her? Cough, cough, cough. Xiao Ju choked. He said expressionlessly, You can leave now. Then I'll leave, Lin Shuanghe said. Don't blame me for not reminding you. He Yan is the best candidate you can think of. Although I don't know what you're going to do, but whatever you do, it will be very dangerous. Normal girls won't be able to handle this kind of dangerous situation. You don't trust those who can handle it. He Yan has fought side by side with you a few times. You know her quite well. In terms of loyalty, his gaze fell on Xiao Ju. He seemed to be pondering. Are you going to take Shenmu Xue with you? I think she would be very happy to go with you. However, I'm afraid that if Lord Shen finds out, he won't be able to resist rushing to Liangzhou to chop off your legs. I've seen more girls than you've trained soldiers. I think, little sister, he doesn't like you now. A girl who doesn't like you and you pretend to be husband and wife is the least likely to cause trouble. If you change Shenmu Xue, then something big will happen. Most importantly, little sister, he always dresses as a man. Other than you, no one knows what she looks like. It's like a person who fell from the sky. If she's really exposed, it'll be easier to hide her identity. Xiao Ju calmly looked at the teacup in her hand. She didn't know if Lin Shuanghe had heard or not. A girl's thoughts are the most difficult to guess. A girl like little sister, he who is simple and straightforward with everything written on her face, or who says it directly, is suitable for this job. You might as well say that she's an idiot. Lin Shuanghe choked and said angrily, I've said all that needs to be said. I only said this because we're brothers. Think about it carefully. Think about it carefully before you choose someone. After he finished speaking, he grabbed his fan and left. After he left, Xiao Ju put the teacup back on the table and sighed lightly. It was late at night. He Yan washed up and sat in front of the mirror. He ate too well during the new year in the army. He looked at himself in the mirror and felt that he seemed to have become slightly chubbier. Fortunately, he was born slender and weak. Now that he was slightly chubbier, he didn't look too plump. Instead, he looked a little less skinny and more delicate. He looked like a young lady who was raised by a wealthy family. It was just that this kind of coquettish behavior was really inappropriate in the military camp. He Yan waved his fist at his reflection in the mirror and made a fierce expression. He felt that he still looked imposing and was relieved. He walked to the bed and climbed onto it. The bed was as cold as ice. There wasn't enough charcoal in the army camp. Although the weather was slightly warmer after the new year, it was still a little cold at night. He had to use his body to warm up the mattress under him. Just as he felt a little warm, he suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. He Yan was stunned for a moment. He cursed in his heart. Who was it? It was the middle of the night. It wasn't easy to warm up the bed, but now that he went out, it was cold again. The knocking continued. He Yan couldn't pretend that he didn't hear it even if he wanted to. He could only put on his outer garment and opened the door. When he opened the door, Lin Shuanghe was standing outside. This person was seriously wearing a thin, white shirt on such a cold day. Even if he added cotton, it wouldn't be very thick. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to look so elegant. He was even fanning himself. Ian couldn't help but grab his fan. "Dr. Lin, can you stop fanning yourself? It's really cold." Lin Shuanghe stopped and smiled. "Okay, why are you looking for me so late at night?" Lin Shuanghe, "Brother He, let's talk inside. I don't have a problem." Ian replied, "But Brother Lin, didn't you say that a man and a woman alone?" Before she could finish speaking, the young man walked past her and went inside. He stomped his feet and said, "It's so cold." "Ian." She closed the door and turned around. Lin Shuanghe was still nagging. "Why didn't you light a charcoal brazier in your room?" "It's too cold." "I ran out of charcoal," Ian said patiently. "Since it's so cold, can Dr. Lin just tell me what's the matter?" "I've thought about it. There's something I must tell you." The sound of knocking interrupted his words. The two of them looked at the door in the middle of the room. The knocking sound was coming from inside. Yin was stunned. Knocking on the middle door meant that it was Xiao Ju? What did Xiao Ju mean by knocking on the door in the middle of the night? She looked at Lin Shuanghe. Lin Shuanghe also had a suspicious look on his face. Yin walked over, hesitated for a moment, and unlocked the door. Second young Master Zhao's expression was calm and elegant. His gaze swept past Lin Shuanghe for a moment and quickly returned to Yin. Yin didn't know if it was an illusion, but she felt that second young Master Zhao's expression was a little strange. "Commander-in-Chief, what's the matter?" "Lady He." He took a step forward and bent down slightly, looking straight at her. The young man had a handsome face. His eyes were like autumn water, full of moonlight. At such a close distance, she could clearly see his long and slightly curled eyelashes. His voice was low and magnetic, making her heart beat faster. "Do you like me?" "That you're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.